watching the blank monitor. Here we are. So I guess we're on. So we'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. This is one of a recurring series of meetings between, I guess a better way to put it correctly is among the school committee, the finance committee, and the select board. So the purpose of these meetings really is to have a somewhat high-level conversation about the budget coming up, some of the needs and issues that each of the constituents here are facing as we work together as the leadership of the town to move us to a spring town meeting where we present our budgets to the voters of Millis and have them decide what we will appropriate and what we will appropriate it for. So I want to welcome everyone here tonight. In the interest of the viewing audience, I would ask that we go around the room and just introduce ourselves, each one by one, and identify which body you serve on. So we'll start over in the corner with Pete.
Good evening, Pete Berube. I'm on the Finance Committee and also the Capital Planning Committee.
Doug Riley, Finance Committee.
Pete Germain, Board of Selectmen.
Stephen Catalano, School Committee.
Carrie Roach, School Committee and Capital Planning Committee.
Joyce Boyardi, Finance Committee.
Kathy McGinnis, Finance Committee.
Jim Borgman, Finance Committee.
Jody Garson, Finance Committee.
Craig Schultz, Finance Committee.
I'm Jim McCaffrey from the Select Board.
Katie Tu, Finance Committee.
John Barry from the Capital Planning Committee.
Mike Kaczynski, Town Administrator.
Carol Johnston, Finance Director.
And we have in the audience, we're not going to pass the mic, Terry Wiggin and the Superintendent, Nancy Gustafson. Hello. The all-important Deirdre Gilmore in the back taking the notes so that each committee will have minutes. And we have the audience, the guest audience, made up of Erin, who will ask all the tough questions. As a formal matter, I don't believe there is a quorum of the school committee, so you won't have to call a meeting to order. There is quorum for the select board and the finance committee, so I'll start as a vice chair of the select board and calling the meeting of the select board to order. And I'll turn it to the finance committee chair.
I call the Finance Committee meeting to order.
We also have a quorum of the Capital Planning Committee.
Oh, that's right. Yes, we do. So we're going to call.
So I will call the Capital Planning Committee meeting to order as well.
Thank you, John. So we have an agenda this evening which starts with what we did last year, which is just kind of an overview, high-level overview of some of the issues that the town is facing on its municipal budget as well as on the school committee, the school department. This is meant to just inform the group as well as the public as to some of the issues that we see unfolding, which may or may not have a direct impact on the budget for fiscal year 21, but gives us some context. So I'll start by just doing some rundown of the big picture from the municipal side. And of course, the municipal government is working hard and hopefully continue to work hard with the goal of serving our population, the changing population of Millis, and after some question about topping off, now it's the growing population in Millis because of new development in town. So some of the issues that we're facing on the municipal side, which are going to impact the short-term or long-term, first of which is the senior services. Senior services for the growing population of seniors in our town. And really that issue is twofold at this point. One, of course, is the facility that our seniors are using for a senior center, and the other is the scope of senior services and our ability to provide services to this growing population in Millis. Right now, pursuant to to a town meeting appropriation, we have kicked off our study of the senior center, reviewing the current center, reviewing the senior programs, and looking at alternatives for proposing to the town a long-term solution for providing a home for senior services. That, in all likelihood, will be something you will hear more about. There was a meeting yesterday, which was several hours in length. There's been questionnaires sent to a number of seniors as well as to the people who reside in this building. because one of the options under consideration is utilizing this building perhaps in a different way to provide a senior center. Not that we're not looking at the potential for a new building, but we are taking an active look at what they call in the trade restacking the VMB to provide a more hospitable environment for not only the people who work here, but the seniors who use this building for services. So that study is underway, and that is under the guidance of the Permanent Building Committee. One of the things that's clear from that at the outset is that if you're going to have a center, you need to build a center for the programming that you're going to offer. So that's why there's been a lot of conversation about the nature of the programs and what we might do in the future to have a facility that doesn't run out of space or run out of the ability to serve the seniors 2 years after it's done. So the second item we have that's ongoing is the DPW facility. The DPW facility is going to be reconstructed or built a new one, approved in the November town meeting. That study is also underway. So we're looking at the design phase right now, and we will hope to work further on that design phase and move forward toward construction during the calendar year 2020. That's also under the guidance of the Permanent Building Committee. On the municipal side, we are engaged in an active review of DPW operations, the organization of the DPW, its ability to meet the needs of the public works function in town, as well as the formulas under current use for allocating costs to the enterprise funds. So that study is underway. We are hoping to complete that study within a month or two on a much more accelerated path than some of the other work, not because it's any less complicated, but we do feel it's urgent to take a look at that and look at allocations to enterprise funds. We've talked a lot on our end at the Select Board on improving communications to the citizens of Millis, and not only finding ways to improve communication, but also to encourage more citizen engagement in the town's operations and in volunteer work for committees and whatnot. The folks in this room are all committed to spending time and treasure, if you will, on the helping their town, and we're just hoping to find ways to attract new people to provide the same kind of commitment that some of these folks here have demonstrated over quite a period of time. We are looking at what we perceive to be a deficit in two functions. One is IT, and the other is HR management. As well as to manage this enterprise, we think we need to do a better job there. We certainly have got appropriation to hire a part-time IT director for the municipal side of the operation. HR support is still a vision for the future, at least as we look at the short-term budget requirements. That doesn't mean there's not a need. That just means that we may not be able to fund that need. We have a challenge on the municipal side that some of you may be aware of from watching recent meetings, that development is strong in town in terms of residential development, and it's quickly utilizing or eating up, if you will, all of the sewer capacity that we have available at the Charles River Pollution Control District. So it's a potential break on some development if we're unable to provide sewer to developers, whether they be commercial or residential, who want to come to town, and because of some of the wetlands and whatnot that we have in town, their inability to hook up to the sewer may prevent them from actually doing development. This is something that's under active consideration by the board as the sewer commissioners, but it is a potential issue that we have to face. At the same time, there's good news, if you will, from the ratepayers' point of view, because of the increased number of customers that we see for the sewer system and the water system will enable us to grow revenue at a faster pace than we have in the past. The other thing that we've had some conversations about, and we will continue to have conversations about, is forms of tax relief. Everybody in the room is well aware of the fact that we had the full debt exclusion for the Clyde Brown School, went on the tax bills for in December. Not that it wasn't expected, but now that it's here, sometimes it feels a little more difficult than we might have thought. We certainly are looking to provide tax relief through growth, But as I said, to the extent that we have inhibitions or limitations on that, it puts further stress on us to try and deliver services efficiently so the taxpayers believe that they are getting a good amount of service for their dollar. We are also, the new assessor is taking another look at some programs that we have that we may be able to do better on, which is to provide some targeted real estate tax relief to certain seniors in our town. We want to make sure that we're using all the programs that are available to us to provide our seniors with the ability to get fair treatment for their tax, on their tax burden, but also sending recurring messages to them that we don't want them to have to leave our town because of the tax burden. And we're going to hear a little bit more about the long-term capital plan from the chair of the Capital Plan Committee. That's also an issue that the Select Board and the School Committee have been actively engaged in, and the Finance Committee, because all of us are represented on that group, to create the long-term capital plan, which outlines for everyone what capital needs are over a period of time, and also tries to stagger them or to filter them in to slots of time where they be more affordable. And so I would like to just conclude and thank everybody for their work. And believe me, we're still talking about and thinking about roads, roads, roads. With that happy note, if the school...
I would defer to the capital planning or the FinCom if they want to go first.
Okay, the FinCom...
That I was going to be
Okay.
speaking.
Okay. The FinCom doesn't get to speak because they just
Listen.
tell us what to do.
Whoever's ready.
This is the proposers. So, okay, why don't we do, because the next item on the agenda,
If you need me, I can speak to it.
all right, why don't you we're not looking for detail, just some,
I will not be as nearly as detailed as you, but in general,
I had warning, because I set the agenda.
so in general, each year, we just had our first preliminary budget kind of look, and we still are in the process of negotiating with at least one union. And so part of our issue is we're very salary heavy. About 83% of our total budget goes to salary, 17% goes to expenditures. And then we are contractually obligated each year to pay, just as on the town side. So whatever little extra money we can find is usually going just to meet our needs of continuing to meet our obligations under the contract. As a higher level issue, is that there was a new Student Opportunity Act, and there's a minimum now of per pupil spending, right? So what we get for the state, and we're getting $30 per pupil, while other towns and other cities and municipalities increased dramatically. We were not in that position, so we were hoping for better news. We were hoping for good news, except we're not seeing the benefit of the Student Opportunity Act, which was a new legislation that just came down. So we will continue to get by and do what we need to do. But a couple of things that we have, in addition to the money that we receive from the state, the additional money that we receive from the town, we also have school choice money. And we have been self-funding a lot of our both salaries and expenditures. That money we're not bringing in enough money to continue to pay for we're actually very close to a critical problem where we will not have enough money to continue to pay. There's more salaries in there than we would like. We have tried to, and we have slowly transitioned salaries out of the school choice money and putting them on the budget, but it's been a slow process. So we're in a place where we're very concerned about where we're going to end up as that balance and what that revenue does decrease. We were hoping for benefits from the state. We're just not seeing it at this time. And so part of the budget issue is that we identify, and the superintendent and the business manager and all the admins sit down for the lack of a better term, a wish list. And a wish list is not, we'd like, new TVs in all the rooms. It's, we need a new reading specialist. We need a new math specialist. We need to increase the amount of hours for tier support. We need to build a bridge program. So when we look at our core needs, the most critical needs, before they present to us, they evaluate and they really edit, a lot of self-editing, we're at $202,000 just at the core needs, and these are rough numbers, and then roughly another $200,000 on critical needs. So above and beyond the money that we would need just to continue the slight increase in expenditures in addition to the salary, we're looking at $400,000 that, and if we went through the list, and we're not prepared to do that just yet, if we went through the list, I don't think anyone would see this as a bonus or just a little bit of above and beyond. It's truly, it's educational support, it's salary, it's hiring of tutors and specialists, and really, once again, to try to keep, and we've talked about this in the past, to try to keep as many students in district. Putting kids out of district for special education is costly. There's a transportation cost, the tuition cost, and the more we can do to keep kids in district, the better it is for the district, it's better it is for the kids. And so we've been slowly trying to build up our capacity around SPED, but those are costly services. So a lot of our needs, both core and critical, are related to that. They're not all, but a lot of them are needs. So that's just a general overview. Nothing is dramatically different from what we have done in the past and what we have presented to the different boards. It's just a continuation of, is there something coming down the line that we need to look at? So, but we're roughly in the same place, trying to get more to increase our capacity, but limited revenue.
I have a couple questions for you.
All right?
Because it ties in with what we're going to talk about later. So one of the things is the minimum spending per pupil. Have those formulas changed as well in terms of what's included in that spending? I know that the school department in Lynn got in trouble with some of the things that they were including, or they needed to include things, and so the state kind of came down hard on them, saying that they weren't spending what they said that they were spending. Have those formulas changed? And if not, if we were to start sharing some functions between the town and the school, would that impact the so-called spending per pupil that the schools are reporting?
No, because No, because that, I started to answer, and then I
I know,
No,
it's
because
always
this
best
is-
to check.
This is the receiving of the money. This is what the state is saying.
What the state is
Right.
giving.
This does not impact,
It's not what the town is saying that they're spending, it's just the receiving from the state.
we were hoping for more,
Okay,
and we didn't get it.
because there's the formulation from the state, but it's kind of still a little wacky.
So this is still fairly fresh, and we're just kind of going through and figuring this out. Some of the final regs were in December, or even.
Right. They're still putting on presentations. There's going to be one coming up here that I'll be going to, the Assistant Commissioner of DESE on this topic. But one of the things that happens when your net school spending is calculated, it does include contributions from the town.
Okay,
So
for shared functions.
For shared functions,
Okay.
and there's a whole list that I get every year when I do the end-of-year report. There's a whole list of expenses that I get from the town that goes into the end-of-year report, and that goes into the calculation of Millis's net school spending contribution. And typically speaking, Millis has always been above its minimum contribution
That the state would
that
require.
the state would require.
Okay.
So they're kind of in the same ballpark, but they're separate and distinct.
Yep. I have another question. And how dependent are we on school choice funds right now? What's the approximate level that we're getting as a town?
It's about 540, 550,
Okay, so it's a chunk.
550,000, right? I just want to clarify.
And
Yes, it is.
so I didn't catch exactly what you had said about how those funds are used. Right now, as I understand it, we're trying to not use it so much for the operational budget because it.
No, we've tried over
Okay.
the years to shift salaries from there when possible, when we've identified abilities or places where we could, someone has retired, a position has changed, We have shifted some salaries out of there.
Okay,
And then what we will do is we will often spend sped tuitions or some one-time funding,
right.
prepayment of tuitions, which are expensive. But we haven't been able to do nearly as much because we would have, I mean, we're talking 500.
Yeah,
On a great year, it's 500. It's been higher than that in the past.
right, yeah. I know that it's an issue with a lot of districts.
Thankfully, we have a good district and we have many more students choicing in than choicing out.
Right.
Right? But if you lose one or two, three or four, now all of a sudden you're talking, they're $5,000 a student.
Now you have an operational budget deficiency if you're using it for that.
And I just want to be clear, we're not crashing and burning yet, but
Right.
we are getting close to where we're not going to be bringing enough money in to help cover what we need to do. So we've been thinking about this and planning for this and talking about this, but
Okay,
it's limited revenue is the
all right,
problem.
thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Just a question on that $30 per student. Is that the question, additional money coming in? Because we, as a town, have never allocated Chapter 70 money straight to the schools. Whenever any money comes in, so if it's an additional $30 per student, that goes into the general fund to be divided. So, and that's going to get into what we talked
No, I
about
don't
later.
think that's above and beyond. That's what we're
that's-
getting per student.
That's what you're getting per student from the state?
Correct.
As part of Chapter
minimum,
70 funding?
right.
Funding, okay. So that doesn't change anything. And
They
it-
adjusted it, and that's all it got to is $30, which is the minimum.
Okay.
So we're not.
So it doesn't
we did not-
change a
we-
thing.
There was no windfall for us.
I didn't think there was a windfall, but I was going to say, and the way the thing that differs our town from others in a lot of cases is we don't count Chapter 70 money as exclusively for schools. Because there's been years when Chapter 70 has gone up considerably, and we've just put that in the general fund and split it historically 65-35. There's also years when stimulus monies come in and the school got $1 million, $1.5 million, and we gave all of that to the school.
Right.
And didn't take any of the town share of the money on the split. So I was just curious about the revenue source. So it doesn't sound like it's going to change the amount that's coming in.
No.
And even if it did, it wouldn't matter because it gets divided anyway.
Yes.
Maybe just one quick question. Steve, on the Student Opportunity Act, who did get additional money and why?
A lot of the districts that were higher concentrations of students in poverty, living in poverty. So a lot of the cities, a lot of the gateway cities, which are smaller cities, but, you know, the Fall Rivers, the New Bedfords, the Brocktons, so some other cities that are struggling with income and the amount of people living under the poverty line. So those districts did benefit. There was talks that they were going to try to share the wealth amongst everyone, but when it came down to it, most of those districts were the ones that truly benefited.
Thank you.
No windfall, but benefited.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, really, which is a quick review of the budget calendar. All the folks in this room are going to be actively engaged at one point or another in the budget process, either in budget preparation and/or budget deliberation and/or developing budget recommendations to the town. So what I thought we would do now is just to try and circulate for everyone what our expectation is in terms of the budget calendar, which reflects not only what the jobs that you folks are going to do, but frankly, what we need to do on the business management side to provide you with the information that you will need in order to accomplish what your assignment is. So I would ask that the finance director and the town administrator together work on this to go through the calendar of events. And I'd like it to be, to the extent that there's a member of one of the groups that has a concern about this, let's air it now, so that if we have to make some adjustments here, we can try to accommodate. Notice I said try to accommodate, but this is what we're recommending in terms of the calendar, so that we're ready well in advance of the town meeting, and that the town meeting will have the information it needs to make decisions.
So the
If you could
budget
speak
calendar.
into the microphone, would be great.
The budget calendar is very similar to what we presented last year. The dates were changed. December 20th, I distributed all the templates out to each department head. for them to submit back by January 17th. We've received all of the budget information from the departments with the exception of one, which we'll be receiving tomorrow, but we will be ready for the presentation on Saturday. That presentation is going to be...
Can I just interrupt for a minute? This is from the municipal department.
Municipal departments,
Let's
yes. Yes.
So the municipal departments are coming before the select board on Saturday to run through their budget requests.
Right. So that will be presented to the select board on Saturday. We'll have the budget book that's presented to the select board available to the finance committee on Tuesday. And then the finance committee can meet with department heads as they, wish to, and set up meetings on their own for the remainder of February and all of March. April will be preparing the FY21 annual budget presentation for the town meeting. And then, of course, May 11th is the town meeting where the budget will be presented.
So just a word on this, which is a change that we made on the municipal side last year to hold all the budget discussions from the select board in one day to get them all done. Almost all of them are going to be there. And that hopefully was going to free up time for department heads then to be able to meet with the finance committee in a reasonable time. Well, our definition of reasonable, but it was, we believe it's an improvement over what we were running into in some prior years. That's our belief. I'd like to ask the Finance Committee, if they have some issues here, some questions they have, some concerns. Your concern is that we actually meet the deadline. Is that true?
That's always the concern. No, I appreciate that the select board's trying to kind of do a review as efficiently as possible. And I think we've gotten more efficient over the years instead of trying to duplicate what the select board is doing, to really just pull in those budgets that have major differences or questions, or, of course, we always want to speak with the school committee, and because theirs is a much larger budget than all the others. So, but in terms of meeting with the individual departments, it all depends on kind of what we see coming out of Saturday. I, for one, will try to be there when I can. It starts at 9.
Yes, 9 o'clock.
So, yeah, any finance committee members who want to make it for parts of that, it might make our meetings more efficient. I just don't like duplicating work, making people come in and do the same show twice. But where there are large changes from one year to the next, we'll want to, or where there are questions that are still outstanding after that meeting, we'll want to see those folks at our finance committee meetings.
Can we be sure to provide to the Finance Committee members the order of appearance? We have an agenda which tells you what time which group is going to be there, so if we could just share that with them.
I think we posted that.
It's posted, I know, but maybe we could
Right.
send them an email and say, here it is, in case you can't,
Deirdre will take care of it for us.
fine. Okay, Deirdre,
She
can you
takes
please take
care
care
of
of
us.
Could I ask, on your end, I know this is a guess at this point, it's kind of like, your goal, of course, is to not only to deliberate and decide and recommend, but also to produce your report. We always like to make sure we understand kind of, we're working back from a publication date, so that first of all, you need enough time to be able to deliberate and then prepare your message and then get it printed and whatnot. So the town meeting is scheduled for May 11th, and you're going to need, when would you typically, based on a couple of weeks early, and maybe the town administrator knows this too, when would we publish the Finance Committee report and send it to all the citizens? And hopefully this year also post it, as we did before, on the website.
It's usually the week before pre-town meeting.
Yes, I believe so.
Deirdre says the 27th.
April 27th is the deadline, okay?
About 2 weeks prior to town meeting. I
Okay.
believe,
is when it would go out.
when it would go
When it
out.
goes out, right?
Yeah. So we need to have our recommendations set by the 22nd, by April 22nd.
So maybe we could just amend this
Yes.
to put that in there? On the school side?
We usually go, usually right before mid-March. We've gone like around the 11th or 12th in the past, so we're not ready yet.
Yeah,
We'll definitely, we'll
that
be ready
seems
by.
like the right time frame for us.
Yeah, so let's find a meeting towards the middle of March. I don't want to
Yep.
go very early, but
Yeah.
mid-March we'd be fine.
That sounds
And then
reasonable.
we'd be available to come back if there was. if there was a need.
Exactly, yep. If we have some questions, we're still working on priorities.
I understand.
Okay, and just, I'm sure that we all understand this, but I want to reemphasize for the public who would be interested, all these meetings that occur, whether it's the budget deliberations that we've described from next Saturday or this Saturday, the FinCom meetings, the school committee meetings, they're all public meetings. And I realize that to some degree, people would like to rely on cable or whatever other streaming happens, but they are public meetings, they are in a place, and if you want to come and ask a question or comment or just learn a little bit more, please take the opportunity to attend these meetings, because they are the really important, crucial stepping stones to building the budget and presenting it to the town. So that's our first page. Second page is the preliminary look at the revenue projections for fiscal year 21, but also in keeping with what we have been doing the last year or two is to republish, if you will, and update the 5-year projection for revenue growth and revenue taxes and whatnot, state aid. Not that I'm critical, but I find it a little hard to characterize state aid as increasing because it's barely keeping track, as the same thing that's happening in the school area, barely covering inflation enough. So thank you, state, for giving us some money, because it's our money. Well, the governor got up again and bragged about state aid keeping pace with budget growth, and 2.5% increase of the state aid year over year, then he's met his objective. And I'm not being critical, but it isn't coming here. So anyway, that said, I'll let you.
So
Anybody else who'd like to rebut that would be happy to. I'm not trying to do a political stand here, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that state aid is not the driver of our ability to expand services, that's for sure.
Exactly. So with the estimated cherry sheets that have come out, our state aid is going to go up $12,400 from last year. That's what it is right now. So,
State aid was $6,497,917
last year,
for fiscal year 20.
right, at the
Essentially
recap.
level funded. It's
Right.
essentially-
So,
That's not 0.5%.
no, it isn't.
1/10 of 1%.
So it's a big number, but it is a pretty static number. And if you look back over history of the last 10 or 15 years, and it just hasn't increased. It just hasn't. In whole dollars, yes, but in our ability to try to, provide services to the citizens, it really hasn't. Not to be confused with Chapter 90, dare I go off on a tangent here, which is the road money, has not gone up at all. Now, we don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but we're just not getting, growth here of the revenue is coming from the local taxpayers and fee payers, not from the Commonwealth.
Right.
Can I jump in real quick
Yeah.
with a question? Why is that number projected to go up so significantly compared to this year in the future years, 22, 23, 24?
For the.
For state aid?
For state aid.
Mhm.
It's actually just 1% is what we're estimating on future years. So the base that was being used is FY '21, because we did get the estimated,
So it's just a planning factor,
It's just a
1%?
planning factor of
And it
1%.
will go up or down, in this case, not even close?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, we could put it in with a zero factor.
I'd recommend you do. That'd be my recommendation, but it carries a little water. 12,000.
Well, for future years, this current year is correct based on the cherry sheet estimates that have
No,
been
I
out.
understand.
Yeah.
So
I
state
can
aid will be
change that.
$6,510,317.
Right
For this,
now.
for the coming fiscal year. It's a good comment, because we want this group to accept, if you will, the way we're doing projections, because then we're not arguing over is it 2% or 3%, but we are consistently projecting. We had some of this discussion last year about not only this number, but the new growth number, and should we be aggressive or conservative? So some of it we don't have a lot of control over for FY '21, because the DOR is telling us how we're going to recognize this stuff. But in out years, we have a little bit more flexibility, and we certainly, for planning purposes, ought to be able to be in agreement that those are reasonable assumptions. So, Carol, go ahead.
Okay. So the base factor for the real estate taxes, everybody understands that. It's the prior year, the FY '20 recap that was certified by the state. So it's the base factor plus the 2.5% growth from FY '20, and then the new growth projected that gets certified by the state as well. That got you to your $22 million number. The next number is 2.5% increase because it's off the base. That's how much you're allowed to go up on your tax levy every year. And then the new growth, we're estimating at $698,000 for next year. That's probably on the high side of what we, after we had a meeting today with Toll Brothers, they're estimating that they're only going to finish between 40 and 50 houses per year and put them on the tax rolls. So,
As opposed to what? As opposed to what? I'm sorry.
as
As
opposed,
opposed to how many?
as opposed to, I think the other people thought it was going to be a much higher number, but that is the number that we were told today. So the 698,000, I think, is a reasonable number for next year, and for the future years going out, I can't see that it would increase any higher than 2.5% based on them only being able to put 40 to 50 houses into the system, as well as other development around town. Our debt exclusion for next year is $3.3 million, and so that brings our total real and personal property tax levy limit at $26,572,000. We'd already discussed the state aid. Our transfer from special funds is our ambulance fund, our cemetery fund, cellular tower fund. Our free cash, the free cash we have available right now is $311,000 for next year. Our local receipts are projected to be $2.6 million for next year. And our enterprise indirect costs, because we use a 2.5% multiplier from the prior year, is $597,000. So that brings our estimated receipts and other revenues to $10,388,000, bringing the total general fund gross revenues to $36,961,000. Out of those, out of that figure, you have to remove your state aid offsets, which is the $460,000, and the debt exclusion, which is up above, which is the $3,290,000. So that leaves us with the net general fund available for appropriation of $33,210,000. Our net enterprise fund revenues are expected, we did a year-over-year growth, as we did last year, at 2.5%, bringing that to $3,228,000. And our CPA funds we remained flat, and that's what we decided last year, we just have it flat year over year. So last year it was $240,500, and that's what we project for this year. Making our other available funds for appropriation the $3,469,000, with a total available funds for appropriation of $36,679,000.
So any questions
I have a question, Mr. McCaffrey.
Yep.
Can you just explain for me, what is the 2.5% increase? Is that are people's real estate taxes increase 2.5% every year?
And it's, right, so the 2.5% is the amount that you can, where the 2.5 increase at the top there, that's how much you're allowed to go up on real estate on the levy, not individual people's taxes, because it's spread amongst the value of all the properties in the town. So some people may feel an increase one year and a decrease another year based on the amount, the value of the total town divided by what your needs are that you voted at town meeting. And that's how your tax rate's set.
I've heard that some towns in some years give taxpayers relief by not including this, and I was wondering if it's probably a selectman decision whether or not, based on the increase people had this year, if it would be considered by the selectmen to waive 1 year of this for residents?
If I may, just to talk about that a little bit, ultimately, it's town meeting and how much is spent at town meeting and appropriations. That is the ultimate driver of whether or not the town goes up to the full levy capacity and the levy limit. Certainly, that's a policy discussion by the select board and the finance committee and the school committee and the other parties as to, what the spending level is going to be, and if it's not going to be at the full 2.5, what that impact would be to the operating budgets. So that is part of the broader policy discussion during the budget process.
I just wonder, through the chair, if we're including that money at town meeting and then all of a sudden people might not want to support that, would it be a better idea to go into town meeting without it as a policy decision by the select board? I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an
for,
idea, but certainly it's a legitimate point that we don't have to raise taxes at all. And this is what we can, this is the most we can do in any year, and then you weigh that against the people's ability to pay, the demands of the services that you're trying to provide. But there is no, to the point that was made, there's no requirement that we raise up to 2.5. That's a local decision.
It's only, if I may, it's only half the equation, too. The expenses side of it is going up.
Right.
Based on union negotiations, based on police officers that I advocated for at Fall Town Meeting.
Right.
That has to be considered. There's a number of things. I think the idea has merit, but there's also expenses that are already penned in.
Right. We'd basically, looking at this, cut $500,000 out of the budgets is what we'd have to do. And it would save the homeowner $150 to $200 on their bills. Nothing to sneeze at, but
No, it
you
isn't.
weigh that against $500,000 worth of
Right.
services.
And I just want to answer to that is that there's extensive new growth coming in, and I just am worried that, well, new growth means more spending, maybe unnecessary spending. So I don't know if we get to the point yet where what does the town need for level spending for FY '21, which includes the unions and salary increases. Is that figure available yet, or is it on here?
Right, so I think you're referring to like a level service budget?
Yes.
Basically, when we'll go through the budget process on Saturday with the select board, the way the municipal departments do it is they submit a budget based on level service, and then they have additional requests. There's a special form for the additional requests, and those are considered separately. I don't expect many, if any of those, to go through. It depends on the priority level and policy discussion. But essentially, looking at from the municipal standpoint, and I'll certainly let the school department speak for themselves on that, but what we'll be presenting as a base budget will be essentially a level service budget.
So somewhere now you do have, based on what the departments have already given you have their level budget.
Yes, we have, not level budget, level service budget.
Level service budget.
Yes. Essentially, what you're going to see is a level service budget, and then you'll see additional requests based on the anticipated needs of the department, and those are taken up as part of the policy discussion as to priorities of the town and whether or not that rises to the level to spend additional funds on those additional services to the community.
And then one other,
Could I-
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry, if I could just add one other thing. So it's certainly important, we know what the budgets are. I just want, we'll get to this later in the agenda. We also have a significant amount of capital items that the town will likely need over the next several years. That's not captured in the budgets that we're talking about here, but it's just another consideration here, that it's not just, the budget is X, the taxes are Y, we're all set. There's also a large list of capital items to be considered as well, and we'll talk a little more about that later. So it's a complicated situation,
Well,
unfortunately.
good. I'm just glad that this is televised, and now, you're able to explain the capital items to people that may watch it at a later date. Regarding the enterprise funds that you have here for indirect costs, will any of those funds go up or down based on the study that's being done now?
If it's determined, it all depends on what ends up happening with the DPW study. Now, could we bear, who knows what it's going to end up being? It could actually end up being more. You don't know.
More
So-
where?
It could
Hold
be-
on, we're not, this is not
Okay.
really the time to be
right.
going over, this is a
I'm
budget
sorry.
summary.
Okay.
No, that's fine. I mean, these are legitimate issues to bring up,
Right.
and there'll be plenty of time down the pike, including at the budget hearing itself, to go over how we're going to allocate these things. I mean, they're points well taken, particularly with the point that Proposition 2.5 is a limit. It's not a mandate. And the boards do have responsibility for trying to weigh the services and the costs to the citizens. And I think that this process will continue over time. People will have the opportunity to weigh in. And that's both with respect to our meetings, school committee, and the finance committee clearly has its responsibility to look over the recommendations made and take a position ultimately for the town meeting to make the decision. This meeting is intended as the first step in trying to educate everybody who's interested as to where we are from a fiscal point of view. It's just the first salvo, so to speak. And it's designed to try and not only send a message to the taxpayers, but also to the departments to say, even when we raise to the limit, if we do, there still are significant constraints placed upon departments, and we're asking them to come to the table with recommendations that show strong, careful stewardship of the taxpayers' money. So more to come on that. So I would like to move on to the capital planning component, because we did tell the chair that he wouldn't have to stay the whole night. John, if you could give the,
Sure. Yeah, let me,
on the
I'm going to pass, why don't you pass those that way? So I'm passing around two documents. There's a cover memo and then an exhibit that looks like this. So we've got two pieces of paper here. Give it a minute to work around the room.
Thank you.
I've got one, you can look at it.
Longer arms over there. All right. So I'm just going to sort of paraphrase what's in the cover memo here, just for the purpose of folks watching on TV. So the Capital Planning Committee has been in existence for almost 3 years now. We'll be coming up on 3 years in May. This is our first comprehensive capital planning report that we're issuing. This right now is a draft. I just want to caution everybody, this is a draft. We're still working on some items. We're collecting the most recent capital requests from the departments. There were a few that have come through this budget process. There's a few items that aren't currently on here that we're going to get on here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But this is a draft. This will be updated and presented to the town formally as part of the town meeting process over the next few months here. The Capital Planning Committee has been working with all the various departments, schools, police, fire, library, DPW, and all the others, also working very closely with the finance director and the town administrator, as well as the select board to sort of compile all these items. Just compiling them in and of itself has taken 3 years, basically, just finding all the items that are out there in town. And frankly, we probably haven't found them all yet. There's probably quite a few other items out there that we still, haven't uncovered that are potential capital needs of the town, but I think this is a good start. So we've got here as a summary. I do want to be clear, this is not a recommendation from the committee that we should go do all these things. That's for the town to decide, through the appropriate processes that we've been talking about. And it's also not we're not summarizing where funding is for these things would come from. That's, as we've been already talking, that's a complicated process. Some of these things might come from, state grants. Some might come from tax revenues increasing. Some could come from enterprise funds. Some could come from, free cash. There's a lot of different places where potential funding could come from. But as we'll see, there are some big numbers here, so there are going to be some pretty serious discussions and decisions that would have to be made. Just to kind of cut to the chase, right now the number we've got here as a total, if you look at the bottom left, or bottom right corner rather, is $47.1 million of capital items. And just to be clear, those are not budget items. So all these budgets are being compiled. These are separate. These are separate items. These are not budget items. This is in addition to all the various budgets that will be compiled over the next weeks here and months here and finalized. Also, just to be clear, like I said, there's sort of the known knowns, and there's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. There's a famous quote there. There's a lot of unknown unknowns that we do not have on this list here. Jim referenced at the beginning of the meeting, senior center, in a study going into that and what are the needs for the town for a senior center. This does not have a big line item for senior center because we don't know what that might be yet. Hopefully at some point we get a line item for senior center on here once we have a better idea of what that could look like. But as of today, we just have no idea. Is that a small item or is that a multi-million-dollar item? We don't know yet. There's some other studies going on currently around the town, some building studies looking at the Lansing Millis, the old train station there, and trying to think about what that could be. That's not on here. The school is undergoing a study for some various repairs to mechanical systems and things like that. We have some items on here for that, but they're very rough estimates, so those could certainly change over time. So this is the point of all that is this is going to be a very fluid document. When we come again next year, this document will be different. It'll have different numbers on it. They could be bigger, they could be smaller. Just be prepared that this document will change over time. And I think as we go and as we get feedback from these committees and also from the townspeople, the format will probably change as well. We've done what we think is our best first draft of how to concisely summarize all this data we've collected. I mean, we've got spreadsheets full of lots and lots of information. We've, thanks to Peter, thank you very much, has been able to condense this down to a pretty digestible one-pager here. But, as people say, well, wait a minute, I need to know more about this or that, this is something that can evolve over time, and we can evolve the report to meet the needs of what people really want to know. So maybe I'll just go through some of the highlights of this, and then I'll take any questions people might have. So as I mentioned, there's about $47 million of items here. This is over the next 10 years. That's another key item. There actually are items that we do know about that are beyond 10 years. Certain vehicles and things like fire trucks, for example, that we know have a lifetime that is beyond 10 years. Those don't show up here. There are some items we have on the list, but we don't have a specific year for them. For example, one notable one is at the bottom of the list, the fields. I know we've had some studies done over the last few years for fields, both related to the school and the town, and also Oak Grove as well. There's been some studies for upgrading some of the fields there. They're fairly significant items. There's about $5 million worth of items there on this list. We don't know when that might happen. We could do it next week, or we could do it 10 years from now, we just don't know. So whereas the other items, we have a pretty good idea roughly what years we're slotting things into based on feedback from, or I should say, what years the departments that have requested them would like to slot them into is probably a better way to say that. We may or may not have funds to do things in the various years that we've got here. The biggest item you'll see is kind of in the middle of the page there. It's infrastructure. That's roads, sewers, a lot of stormwater type things, culverts, drains, that kind of thing. So those are, obviously big ticket items. Some of that would potentially be covered by enterprise funds, some of it not. So it's a mixed bag, but that is clearly the biggest line item we have. For good or for bad, you'll notice that facilities is actually, it's still a relatively big number. It's about $6 million. That's probably a lot smaller than it could have been, and that's because we have a lot of new facilities in town. We have a new police station, we have a new fire station, we have a new Clyde Brown School. The DPW building, which granted is not built yet, but the funds have already been allocated for that. That doesn't show up on here because we're saying that's kind of in the rearview mirror now as far as, a need for the town that's been kind of addressed. So the facilities item is relatively small because we do have a lot of new facilities. Not to say that these numbers couldn't get bigger if we decide there's more significant needs for other buildings in town. The other main categories here, equipment for the various towns, police, fire equipment, that sort of thing. School obviously has quite a few equipment-related things. That's a little bit of a catch-all. Equipment is sort of things that don't fall into one of the other categories. Vehicles, this is actually an interesting one. I think we now have a pretty good inventory of vehicles in the town, which I'm not sure anybody ever knew before. We do have a lot of vehicles in this town. And I think we've kind of got our arms around how many there are and when the replacement of these vehicles needs to occur. There's about $4 million worth of vehicle costs on here. And the one good thing about vehicles is they are a relatively predictable item on the list. We have a pretty good sense from the various, police, fire, schools, when vehicles are going to run out. Cars can only last for so long. And so that one is a little bit more predictable maybe than some of the other ones. There's some miscellaneous items that relate to the school, the library, the Veterans Building. It's about $600,000 of items there. And so it's a lot of items. And like I said, we've got a master list, if anybody cares to really see it, with lots and lots more detail on this. But why don't I pause, because there's a lot here, and I'd be happy to take questions and probably defer them to my other committee members to answer them all. Questions on the report? I guess just a general question that I have for you folks is, our plan is to have this be part of the report, the town report, which is going to be published, in advance of the town meeting. We'd have this probably as part of the Finance Committee report in the back, like we've done in the past, and have this presented to town. Ideally, we'd like to have some, open meeting type sessions with townspeople so they can come and ask questions about it, in advance of the town meeting. But I guess just as a general question, does this feel like, a fair way to communicate some of the capital needs that we're facing? So we appreciate any feedback you have.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what are your thresholds in terms of considering what is a capital expense?
That's an excellent question.
Because I see, $500 on some of the line items, and that seems kind of more of an operational
Yeah,
item.
that's a bit of an oddball one, that one, yeah. It's an excellent question, though, and it is one that we debate quite often, what exactly is a capital item, and it is not always clear-cut. And for example, there are several items on here that arguably should really be budget items because they just show up every single year.
Right.
And, a good example is school bus lease.
Right.
It goes on to the town warrant as an item. It's, technically, I guess, is considered a capital item, but practically, it's maybe more of a budget item. That is in here now, but it is something I think we will want to refine. We would love this to truly be capital items, which roughly speaking is items worth $25,000 or more
Okay.
that are outside of a budget. Unfortunately, it's not quite that clean when we get all these requests coming in. So again, that will evolve too, I think, that what actually finds itself on this list will probably change a bit as we go over time.
Can I piggyback on
Yeah.
that? So you may recall that the Capital Planning Committee worked very hard to consolidate and collect the requirements. What the next kind of focus was prioritizing requirements for Fall Town Meeting, because that's when we really voted on capital items. We have deferred that argument, and we agree that it's one to be had. I'm not sure that it's one to be had by us. It's probably, the definition of a capital item is, the state defines it, but we can, in the town's policies and bylaws, the town can opt to adopt it, amend it, do what they want. This tri-board had a discussion about improving bond rating and having certain fiscal policies that we should adhere to. I think that's probably a good discussion for this body or the select board and the other committees to have. And so I think that should happen. I agree. I think it's a great question, and I agree with what John said. Just hope that helps answer it as well.
Yeah, it seems like having a policy in place will certainly help future capital planning capital planning committees be able to just put boundaries on their purview, so it's not everything gets thrown at you that,
Right.
Really shouldn't be part of the capital
Yeah,
plan.
absolutely, yeah. So for now, we've deferred, if they gave it to us, we're going to call it capital for now, but to Peter's point, we're going to refine that as we go. And just to follow on your point, we are actively looking for new members, so come see us if you're interested. We could use 2 more members.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
John, let me just weigh in on a couple of thoughts here. One, of course, is that not only is there a threshold amount, but the capital item is intended to have a multi-year life.
Right.
It's not something that you have to get every year. That's really the point. Some of these things, because we are required, even though they have a multi-year life like the leases, state law is requiring us to treat them as a capital expenditure, requiring a 2/3 vote. So even though it may look kind of weird, I'm not quite sure that practically, from an appropriation point of view, you can put them into an operating budget, not because you shouldn't, but because maybe we just need to make sure that we have multiple, we have appropriate 2/3 support from town meeting for those items. No, those are the smaller components of this. I would also say that the intent, of course, is not only this is on the website now, or we're putting?
Not yet. We'll post this.
We will be putting it on the website.
Yes.
And we have, the group last meeting decided that we would try to categorize things like, maybe a normal person would look at it and say, well, what are the facilities you need? So you see there's a category for facilities, not just, well, do you need a DPW building? Well, where does it go? So you have facilities, you have equipment, you have infrastructure, and then there's drill downs in the material, which is, okay, what are the infrastructure items? What culvert is it? Or on a facility, the same kind of thing. So there's depth to it. But we have struggled, and we're interested in your input, is how do you get the main message out to folks so it doesn't become stuff that's so arcane that they just throw up their hands? On the other hand, we're all in agreement, we're not going to go to a town meeting with a big item where people can say, well, what else is there down the road? And that's the point of this, really. So any thoughts you want to share either tonight or some other thoughts about how this gets to be a living document for folks? I think that's what we're looking for. And I do want to thank John and Pete Berube
Really nice job.
for doing a great job.
Carrie.
Doing a great job. Okay. John Corcoran for doing a great job.
John Corcoran.
Well, he's not here, so we
We'll
don't
give
have
him and me for just basking in the glory. I mean, that's all I do. So, any other questions on it? Okay, John, thank you very much.
All right, thank you all.
John did volunteer to leave early if he wanted to, so.
But just as, I may stay for a few minutes, but as a formality, I will make a motion to
There's
close
still a
the,
quorum, though.
what's that?
There's still a quorum.
Not if I leave.
So the vice chair will have to close the meeting
If I leave.
if you leave. There's still a quorum?
Okay. Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
As long as I'm in the room, there's a quorum.
No, but we have 3 members. We have 4 members.
You need 4 for a quorum for us.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so you can go and, if you want to make a motion to close the meeting.
All right, I'll make a motion to close the capital planning meeting. All
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No? Okay, we've closed that meeting.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. Next item,
Presentation.
this is a report that has been reviewed and discussed with the group of folks that we asked to go and take another look at the 65-35 formula. And Craig has some material here for us to consider in terms of looking forward as to how we would try to allocate revenue as we go forward.
All right, I'm taking it as a huge sign of confidence that neither of the other 2 people on the subcommittee showed up tonight. So I'm out
Or
here
you will
alone.
get the slings and arrows of
Yeah.
outrageous fortune yourself.
So this is, if you love it, it's all me. If you hate it, them. So, I'm going to start with a little history, and I'll let you read this. I'm not going to read this to you. But the 65-35 split came about at a time when we didn't have enough money. It was a way to divide a set of funds that wasn't adequate to cover everybody's need in a fair and equitable way. We're leaving that period right now, and are heading into a time when we will probably have more funds than we have in the past. In the past, budgets would grow between 3, maybe 4. 4 would be a great year. 3.5 is a typical year. 3% was about the rock bottom, but that was the range we used to run in. We're going to enter a period over the next 10 years where budgets conceivably could grow more than that, between 4.5%, 5%. Now, the problem is if you start allowing, and it depends a lot on the Glen Ellen build-out, if it happens in a condensed period over 4 or 5 years, budgets could grow using the 65-35 split 7 or 8% a year. And if you do that, then as soon as Glen Ellen's built, you've got to start cutting immediately because you don't have enough new tax revenue to support that. So the plan that Mark and Lorraine and I talked about was a way to eliminate these highs and lows and try to make it predictable. So we looked for 3 things: a simple formula that we could all understand, an adequate and sustainable budget revenue, and a way to fund capital projects with the extra. So the first, so the opportunity, Glen Ellen will bring in $2.5 to $3 million in taxes if it's built out over whatever period that is. And if it comes in at 40 homes a year, that's actually better for the worksheet because it stabilizes things. It comes in a nice, predictable, even flow. If it comes in as a lump sum over 2 or 3 years, you have this giant slug of cash you have to figure out what to deal with. We're going to have the adult use marijuana coming in at some point at 3.5% taxes. And then we have new growth that comes in about, if Glen Ellen is coming in at a certain level, the other new growth is about 400,000. So that's the way I thought about it. And it ties very closely to Carol's sheet if I take the 40 homes per year, not the 80 homes that I had started with. So it ties very closely to her numbers for new growth over the next several years. This plan doesn't include any significant new commercial or industrial growth. That doesn't mean it wouldn't be great to have, but that means we haven't had a lot of luck getting it. And I think as long as we keep talking about industrial and commercial saving the day, we're deluding ourselves. This town is 90% residential, and I think it's going to remain 90% residential. I would love to see some nice commercial come in, but I don't think that's going to be the be-all, end-all and save all of our problems. The marijuana cultivation and the marijuana sales are 2 great examples that have brought revenue to the town, so I think they're both good things. This plan also doesn't include any cost sharing for positions. I fully support that. The committee fully supported that, but it really doesn't change things. If you're going to hire an HR director, it still is going to have to come off wherever it comes off, if it's cost shared or not. It's not going to change the revenue that we need or give us new, it's not going to save us money. I don't think state aid will increase. I think I was wildly optimistic at a 0.5% increase when I didn't see the number, and it turns out I was. So I had a worksheet that I worked on that used a 0.5% increase for state aid. And it doesn't include any unforeseen mandates or dramatic changes in funding over the funding needs. So if there's a new state mandate that comes out, we won't be covering it. That's outside of this. If there's another massive project like Glen Ellen that would bring in $2.5–3 million, that's not anticipated. So basically what I'm talking about is the ability for all budgets to grow 4% a year over the next 10 years. That's better than we've been able to grow in the past years. By doing that, we also will have some extra money. It'll be about, let me just pop it up here for a second. It'll be a couple $100,000, between $200,000 and $300,000 a year over the next 8 or 9 years that can be put towards capital projects or other things that are needed, just as long as they don't go in the budget. Because once you put them in the budget in a higher position, you now have to pay for that position each year for the next, well, until you let that position go. So the trick is to keep the growth on budgets sustainable and fair, and 4% in my mind and Mark's mind, and we didn't have a chance to talk to Lorraine about this, but that was a number that we felt was sustainable and fair, and then put the extra into capital projects. That was the idea we worked out and we worked through. So the proposal would be to look at a 4% base budget, take where we are today. So that would mean the schools at 15.8 million and the municipal at 7.9 million, and inflate each of those by 4% each year for the next 10 years, basically. And that would be the budget they'd operate under. That should cover most of your contractual wages. It won't solve all the problems. It certainly won't let you put in wish list items. It won't let you put in expanded hours on council on aging, additional firefighters, additional police. It won't allow those things to happen, but it will sustain the core services that we're currently offering without an additional tax increase to the voters. If something is needed and is determined that we absolutely need to double the hours in the senior center, increase the library hours, bring in reading specialists, and you can't fit those within your existing budget with the 4% growth, that would be the opportunity for a operational override should the departments decide. But that's what operational overrides are for, not for maintaining service. And I think we're in a position where we can maintain service at a fair level and put money towards capital projects, about $2 million towards capital projects, actually, $1.8 million towards capital projects, be that roads, be that other infrastructure, be that the list that we just saw over the next several years. So conceptually, are there any questions about this? Oh, and also said that we'd review it every 3 years was my plan, not go 22 years and then panic and decide to start reviewing it. So we would sit down and do a 3-year, try to put together a 3-year plan, then look at it again for the next 3-year set. Are there questions about that concept?
May I?
Yeah.
When we asked the three of you to come up with an idea, my conception was looking not so much at how we redistribute the budget across some equitable, what you're saying is equitable between all departments, but is there a new way of looking at the budget as a whole? We know we're going to get some new revenues. We also know that there are significant needs within the town as a whole. And when I say the town as a whole, I include schools and everything. I'm not trying to single out the town specifically, but to put it all together and say, okay, we know we're going to get some revenue, whether it allows the 4% or not. I'm not going to go into that because it's projections, and I agree. I don't know what that is going to be. But is there another way of looking at it and saying, we know as a town we have a number of issues we have to address, whether it be in the schools, for repairs, roofs, whatever, or significant repair of facilities, or looking also at the town, its infrastructure, whether it's roads or anything, and taking that and saying, is there a different way we can examine how we might address these needs as a town over a period when we know we're going to be getting some of these new revenues. So I raise that. I don't say that I'm disagreeing with what you've got here. That's not my point. My point is trying to take a different view, and I'm probably not expressing this very well, but taking a much broader view of how we look at the budget and then allocate based on overall needs of the town rather than trying to go down and say, okay, each department gets X percent or whatever, is the way I'm looking at it.
Well, I think that there really is only two ways to get revenue into the town: the taxes in this source or an override.
Right.
And those are the only two ways to do it. And I promise you, Steve is not going to say, we got more than enough, take some of our money and put it towards the Council on Aging, nor are you going to say, we have more than enough, let's put some towards guidance counselors. So I think that it's impossible to imagine that there is another way to take this pie and divide it up without somebody who's currently getting a slice of that pie losing. So it's going to be a question of who loses. And we just don't have enough revenue coming in to make everybody grow dramatically. And, or even one side to grow sustainably, just no cuts, let's say no cuts, and then the other side grow to add.
Okay, let me
Because
pose it
neither
this way.
side has
Here's
that,
where I'm
yeah.
coming out.
Yeah.
You're trying to, in part, maintain the 65-35, laudable. Maybe we ought to be looking at it, rather than Steve's looking at it from the schools and Mike is looking at it from the town, we ought to be looking at it as a town as a whole. What makes the most sense for the town? And if it comes out 65-35 in some aspect, fine. But if it doesn't, we're making a decision collectively for the town, and we may say, we think as a town, we ought to be allocating more funds in this direction, at least for X period of time. That's all I'm saying, is a different view and a different perspective of how we look at using the allocations of the funds that are available.
Yeah, I just don't know that there is a way to do that in a way that prevents a floor fight at town meeting. And it's going to be who gets 400 people to show up at town meeting. Because right now, if you're getting 15, the municipal side is getting, call it 7.9 million. And the school is getting 15.9 million. If you need $100,000 for the Council on Aging, where does it come from? I've got two choices. I can do an override to get $100,000, or I can take it from the school. And is Steve going to say that I can give up $100,000, and I'm picking on you because you're the chair, am I going to give up $100,000 of guidance counselors, teachers, reading aides, because I really believe the senior center needs more staff? And conversely, are you going to say I'm going to give up senior center people because I believe we need reading aides? I don't think that's the case. I think we're at a point now that we have equitable level funding at some point, and if there is the need for something beyond level service, as Kathy talks about, that's when you have to go out and make a case for above level service. And the piece that this does address, that the 65-35 doesn't address, is almost $2 million in capital improvements for roads or whatever else that needs to happen.
Well,
And that would go away if we did a straight 65-35 split or allocated all the money.
I'm just playing a little devil's advocate, because take out the senior center for a moment.
Okay.
Take on roads. We know from our studies that we have $5 million approximately of road repairs confronting this town. We also know that it impacts everyone, whether it's the schools, the students, or seniors, anyone in town. The roads are an issue. So if we look at those types of allocations differently and say, we're not picking on the town or the schools or any one body, we ought to be looking at some more global issues here as to what makes sense in the town overall for the allocation of the funds coming up. All I'm looking at is to say, is there a better way to think about how we might allocate the funds that we have available?
Well, without touching either department, that's what this strategy does. It does take $2 million towards roads, to pick one of the many capital items. That could be high school repairs, it could be roads, but that's $2 million of that $5 million. And I agree, roads would be my first pick. So that's where I would put, so basically we're taking the majority of the Glen Ellen money and putting it towards roads is one way to think about that. And then using our other money to sustain operations for everything else.
Craig,
Yeah.
are you done?
No, go.
When
go
when
ahead.
you guys were looking at this, this split, it was started 22 years ago.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that the budgets now are built around that split? Meaning, we have a general idea what kind of the baseline money coming in, so a changing of that split is going to impact, because we're razor thin as it is.
I think if you change the starting point for either side, you're going to have a world of problems, because we've built budgets based on that. I think you can talk about, I think you could, now, if you're going to argue that, and Peter, if you could make a cogent case why the school deserves 3.75 and you deserve 4.5, have at it. But right now, the split that Mark and I felt was equitable was 4 and 4, because it was just an easy, equitable number. I think Steve will have something to say if you say you need 4.5 and he needs 3.75 to get you to 4.5. But, and I think that's where we're going to devolve into what the split we had, 22 years ago, when we literally had the school packing town meeting floor over a $5,000 budget discrepancy. And the selectmen are trying to do the same thing. It was ridiculous. We spent more time arguing about $5,000 than we did trying to move the town forward. So there is going to be something, and if you really, truly believe that we need another police officer or another firefighter or more hours in the Council on Aging, and you make that case and the Finance Committee agrees with it, it would become part of your base going forward, but we'd have to find that money someplace. And that's what we'd have to look at. And so it does give the latitude that if Steve's getting his 4, and you can argue that there's a reason you need 50,000 more than your 4, I'm open, and then that would go into the base and it would grow by 4.5 or 4% next year, allowing you to stay at the level you need to. I think we're saying 4 is kind of the count-on base, so nobody has to make cuts. If you come in and say, because Glen Ellen is using our senior center at 500 seniors a day, we need 50,000 more. And that's a true argument that happens. I think we'd consider that as a reasonable use of money. And then it would go into the base. And the voters would be able to make that decision.
I guess what I'm saying is, given what's happening, I'm not convinced that we have to abide stringently at 65-35. And I don't mean that.
Let's stop for a minute, because we're not talking 65-35. Are you saying we don't need to use the 15.9 and the 7.9 as our starting numbers?
I understand where you're coming from.
Is that what you're arguing, that you need?
What I'm really arguing is saying we're going to get a bump of some amount of revenue into the town. And how we allocate that revenue is really what I'm looking at. We have overall costs that have to be dealt with in each of the departments. That's a given. The concern I have is with the opportunity coming into the town, how best to allocate it across meeting the most general needs of the community as a whole. And if that says that maybe it's not, that we don't go for a 4%, we go and look at, here's what's come in, and what makes the most sense in terms of that allocation. And I don't mean to be saying it shouldn't be going to the schools, but I'm using that because they do take.
Well, Peter, there's only 2 places it
I
goes,
understand,
you or the schools.
That's what we have to look at. Is the town is a town. It's not just the town operations and the schools. It's a town. And I'm trying to look at it as a whole town, as I know you are. But I'm trying to come up with, are there other ways of looking at it without causing a major issue?
Well, let me phrase it this way. I believe the town budgets can grow by 4%.
I understand.
And that will set aside $2 million for roads or capital projects. Out of operations, not out of free cash or anything else. That'll set aside $2 million of capital projects. So I'm saying all town budgets, I don't care if it's the police, fire, DPW, school, Council on Aging, anything, can grow by 4%. I'll let the selectmen decide that Council on Aging grows by 6 and something else grows by another number. That's not my purview. I don't care how the elementary school grows or the high school grows. That's not my purview. But my concern is, as I think through this, is the budgets by department in total can grow by 4%. That's sustainable. The argument gets after that, anything beyond 4% is unsustainable. We will not be able to do that once growth stops.
So-
And then you'll start into layoffs.
So right now, this is preliminary numbers.
Yeah.
We're not prepared to show anything yet. We're at about 6+.
Yep.
So right now, that's the first pass. We have multiple meetings to go through. So even at 4, which I think is reasonable, and this is level service. This does not include any of those critical and important needs. This is literally level service. So
Yeah.
that is a problem for us, but this is something that we deal with every year. So any conversation, and I'm only one of
Yeah.
5 right now, any conversation that starts talking about adjusting, I mean, we're at a place right now, just at this, where we're in a difficult place. And the shifting of any percentage could dramatically increase. We're talking staff out the door.
Sure, but let's be realistic. The whole town is facing that same dilemma at this point. So I'm not disputing in any way the
You should
concern
not,
that
right.
you're raising, but it's a town concern throughout the town. Mike has that same problem. And as Kathy was trying to point out earlier, she's looking at ways that we can reduce, if possible, the taxes. So this all has to be looked at in an overall perspective of what are the implications for the town operation? And I know you tend to look at it, you're focused on the schools, and I'm trying to say, let's take it as a broader context.
But Peter, I don't understand though where you're going with it when you say that you don't want, there's only this big of a pie. If we're going to devote, if you're talking roads, I get it. If you're talking capital, I get it. We can put that out there. But if, for one section to grow, the other section has to get smaller because there's no new source coming in. So
But you're looking at it as sections, and I'm saying it's a town. It's a difference perhaps in the way I'm trying to conceive of it, as we as a town collectively have issues to deal with. It just happens that we're broken into two, we break it structurally into two entities, but it is a whole town. And we need to think about that in addition to what are the implications if we do this to this group, that group, or some other group, whether it's schools, seniors, DPW, town. However you want to look at it, I'm just saying, let's look at it a little differently. And maybe I'm not expressing that
But we've
very
built
well.
our budgets for 22 years roughly on the 65-35 split. I mean, that's what we've built, and that's what we've sustained. And some years were good, some years were bad, and we've had some dips, but that's how we've operated. So any changing of that formula is going to have dramatic impacts. This is not above and beyond extra money, and we're having a conversation that we have a windfall of $1 million. What are we going to do?
And I'm trying to move away from I am moving away from the 65-35, except on the start. Because if we stuck at 65-35, we'd be looking at 6%, 6%, we'd be looking at you'd be great. But 4 years from now, you're laying people off.
Yes.
And that's the problem,
I
And so-
fully appreciate what
Yeah,
you're doing.
at some point,
Yes.
the new growth stops.
Could we have, if there's others that'd like to
Yeah.
have some say.
I would
yeah.
please,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair. I hear what you said, Mr. Catalano, about it's been the same breakdown for years, but that has always been with regular developments. The town is new in Glen Ellen and another Acorn Street senior development, which will not be affecting the schools at all. And it will be affecting the police, the fire, the DPW, the water and sewer employees, senior center. Those will all be increased because of the senior centers. So I was always hoping that when I was on the planning board and we were approving all of these projects, that the number one concern was that it would not be affecting the school, so it would not be increasing the cost of running the school, knowing further that it would be increasing municipal services. So I think the sense that I had was that that money would completely come out of the 65-35 split, because what it's doing, Glen Ellen, and the Glen Ellen money is fairly new, so it might not be affecting the schools as much now because it's a third built or 25% built out. But how are we going to pay for, and we've had the fire chief and the police chief in to say that these projects will increase their needs. So, this 4% and everything, and what Mr. Jermaine says, I wonder if anyone's given any thought by the marijuana money and the Glen Ellen money and the, any sort of over 55 developments or the assisted living one on Bridge Street that may come to fruition, if that be just taken out of the percentages.
We did look at that, and we didn't see, and Mike, you probably looked at more than I ever have, didn't see any town where they were earmarking homes and others. One of our members proposed that we count homes with children and devote their,
No, that's not what I'm
no, I'm
talking
not saying
about.
that either.
Excuse me, so
But no,
let's
I know, but
stay
we've
with
had
what
all
the
sorts of
issue
ideas
is.
proposed, and that's one of them. We never saw that done anywhere else, that they segregated
So we
communities.
can't do it, I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm not going back and forth, Mr. McCaffrey, I'm just wondering if, this is just a proposal that you put out, and it doesn't seem like Loring had much input, it was the two of you, and I don't know how much.
Hold it, we're not going
participated.
to, can I just, this is definitely a conversation. We as a group decided we'd like to take a look at the revenue split. And now we have a proposal on the table, which this group, by the way, doesn't take a position as a group. We are an informal group that comes together, and each of our separate committees and boards is responsible for the governance of its particular component. But I guess what I would like to see at the end of the day, whatever road we go down, that we end up with, whether it's this written policy or some written policy that the three groups can agree upon. We've had a policy which is out there, and it was easy to write, just said 65-35, A plus B minus C equals D. We're asking whether that makes sense. There's a recommendation on the table that says it's time perhaps to move on to a different methodology. So I do want us to work toward, this is my view now, I'm not the chairman of this, I'm just the convener, to work toward a written policy that we can agree on. And there are pluses and minuses. So that's what we're trying to hammer out here. And I'm not sure we're going to hammer it out completely when we have the first initial proposal put on the table, because we have, as we all know in this room, we've asked ourselves to come up with something for a year or so, and now we've got something. Is it the right something? I don't know. I think there's a point of view that may say that there's some tweaks we could make to it. And so it's important that the ideas still surface in public here among this team. And I do want to, one of the things that Ms. McGinnis mentioned is a result of a long-term land development policy, which has been implemented by the planning board for 20 years, is to try and find ways to have residential growth without having an impact on the school department. We had as recently as last November a zoning bylaw change because there was a potential, as the development played out, that the town would be exposed to some special needs costs that were not part of the model. And the town decided at town meeting to pass a zoning bylaw change to try and avoid that cost to the town. Now, I'm not in favor of segmenting the town properties and funneling the money into a different bucket. That I think is an idea, I just don't favor the idea. What I would like us to do at some point, and really it's, where does the baseline get set? If the baseline is right today, based upon the needs of the town today and the projected needs of our population, then a simple formula which takes the existing configuration of budgets and projects them out in a consistent way makes some sense to me. It makes a lot of sense, because I agree with Mr. Schultz. The last thing we want to do, and many of us, unfortunately for us all, were here 20 years ago and watched these things, and it was not a good situation, where we'd go one by one by one by one. And it was not a good situation, because my view always there was it was a failure of leadership, because the leadership couldn't hammer it out, and they just said to the people, you decide. We don't want to get to that point. And I'm preaching a little bit here, but I think there's a component that we should look at is, do we have the right mix today? Not based on the needs of the department, but on the needs of the citizens of the town. And it may be right. And I'm not saying, and I am concerned, though, that if we drag this out, that kind of an inquiry, which I think we should do, frankly, this is my opinion, we're going to really hurt ourselves in the budget that we're right in the middle of. We have to come up with a 2021 solution if it's not the permanent one, I believe. But I believe that we should take a holistic view of this and try to determine whether we're in the right place.
Can I ask a couple clarifying questions, really just on the premise of what's been proposed?
One thing, I'm coming out with you,
Sure.
then I'll.
Yep.
And just to be clear, the 65-35 split was not a committee decision. It was the finance committee saying, we're sick of it. This is how we're evaluating your budgets. If you guys can't come up with a plan that's fair and equitable, we're splitting it. And that evolved into everybody saying, this kind of works. And now, 20 years later, it's kind of turned into, it kind of needs to be relooked at. So it wasn't anybody sitting in a room like this, because quite honestly, 22 years ago, it would have been hard to get the finance committee, the selectmen, and the school committee in the same room. This is a giant step forward from where we were back then. And so that's the key, the way that it started. So I do hear what you're saying, Peter, and maybe a consideration of a different split. I don't think you can go below 4% on the school side, because I think that's the baseline. And if you go over 4.5 on the municipal side, I think you're going to have to start layoffs fairly soon after you start hiring, but that's the model that we have to talk about. But I hear what you're saying, and I can look at some opportunities there.
That's all.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say that, from my perspective, the modeling and the inputs and the structure of this is the job of the finance department. That doesn't mean FinCom can't take a look at it independently, but the finance department is responsible to all of us. Keep in mind, folks, we do have a joint finance function now, where the school and the town are operating in the same financial structure, and soon, not tomorrow, but soon, we will have a consistent chart of accounts so that we will be able to watch this unfold as we go forward. Any member of the public, any member of this committee, to try and determine where we stand. So I agree with Mr. Schultz. This is a real issue. It's an important one for us to discuss, but we have come a long way in our town of trying to work together, and if we're not going to face the hard issues, then we might as well not meet anymore. Pete, sorry.
I need some help. I've only been in town for 6 years, so I need some remedial training, not 20. And if you could just clarify, the 4% is of the previous year's budget, of
The previous year's voted budget. So for the school, it was $15,856,000, and the
Right.
municipal, $7
So that would be
million.
the allowable increase in their budget from year to year.
Right, the voted.
So in a case, and I see there's a sentence in here about, if it's less than is needed, then you tap into stabilization. And I'm not sure if I'm reading that properly, but Steve
To an
just said.
extent. May I
But the starting point would be, we're tapping into stabilization right
No.
from the get-go.
No, not from the get-go, because from the get-go, Glen Ellen's building early. When I was looking at this, and the numbers that I had heard were different than what I heard tonight, that there were going to be more homes per year built in a shorter period, still 354 homes. So on years 22, 23, 24, 25, FY 23.
That's 324, by the way.
What did I say, 354, so 324.
Yeah,
So,
don't-
so years,
Let's
FY
count the homes
20
that are going to be there,
Yeah.
okay?
22, 23, 24, we brought in far more money than we needed. That money was going to be put into stabilization with the expectation that as we got into outline years, we drew that down. Once that money that we'd parked there just for this purpose is gone, we stop. We don't touch stabilization. So basically, since Glen Ellen would be bringing in, under the scenario that I started with, far more than we needed for a 4% growth, we could have either spent all of that on roads and then run out of money towards the end of the cycle, or park it someplace in stabilization or someplace else to return to draw it down at the end of the cycle when we needed to. I would never take money out of stabilization beyond what we put in from operations.
The 4%, is there any caveats on whether that's only to pay for level service budgets, or does that include above level service requests?
That would be
Anything that the department wants?
anything the department wants, but I doubt you'd ever see an above-level service at 4%. Just saying, With
Well, you
union
could.
contract running at 3.5, 4,
But with cost
Yeah.
sharing or savings.
Yeah.
2%
then
they're running.
it- There could be some savings there that would allow for
Yeah.
additional services.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess that I would just like to add there, if this kind of a model is adopted, or however it is, I don't think as the leaders of this community that we should say, if maybe there might somehow, if we figure it out, be shared services. No. The administration needs to work on these, needs to come back with proposals, and needs to show how this is more efficient, or it saves money, or it creates new opportunities to go look for more grants or whatever. And, that to me is, if we're going to make a deal about this kind of revenue share, if you will, I don't think it's a nice to have. I think it's contingent upon these two administrations, if you will, coming together and figuring out ways to save money by combining services. Because if you don't put some teeth into it, if we don't do it as the committees, it's not going to happen. And it's not any kind of criticism of the administrators. But we need to really look at these things hard and decide, if in fact, pick one, HR, we're deficient, it's costing us money ultimately because we're not administering things properly, and we need some support, but we can't afford it on either side of the house, then both the two sides have to get together and supply it. So, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good discussion, background.
Now, I would assume that 4% keeps you at level service, but you're right. If somebody comes in and if I see that the school is adding 3 guidance counselors and they've not had to make any cuts, I'd be wondering what's going on there, and if there's a reason why we need to give them the full 4%. It's my expectation that they would never be in a position to add significant positions at 4%. And same thing on the town side.
Would you know if any department, DPW or town side, school side, would you go through the same budget process if you changed the formula?
You mean change this formula to 4% as proposed?
Right. Would you still go through the same process?
Oh, yeah,
that we're
exactly
talking
the
about
same
starting
process.
on Saturday?
Yeah, I would go through the same process because it's important to know what that money's going towards. And then you do look at it and you do see where that money's being allocated. But from the Finance Committee side, our job is to talk about fair, equitable, in my opinion, fair, equitable distribution of the available revenue and make sure it's going for budgets, what the elected people decide is important. I'm not the one that's been elected to weigh the pros and cons of a senior center, police, fire, DPW. That's the selectmen. And I'm not the one to decide guidance counselor, teacher, resource, paraprofessionals at the school. That's the school committee. Our job is to make sure we don't see, if I saw, a lot of equipment coming in, that was being purchased for, I don't know, field work or something, I might be wondering what's going on there. But I'm not really in a position I don't believe we're in a position to second guess them as a FinCom. I believe our position is to evaluate it fairly and equitably, and if it's reasonable, it flies. On both sides.
Well, part of this proposal, of course, is a revenue model that we think is going to get us where we think it's going to go. And I think that we need to, if we're going to try and make a change in this policy, then we need to be confident that the revenue growth that we're talking about will support it. And I think part of what the proposal does I think it's an important component is a restraint on the departments. You can call it a cap, whatever you want to call it, a level service, whatever it is. Because we want them to be able to, at least I believe on the board side, we want them to come in and, prove to us that they can sustain the level of service that they have provided. And if they're going to make a case for expanded service, then they have to make that separately. So I'm not sure that's responsive, but I don't look at this, whatever this turns out to be. Look, a level service proposal budget at the outset from a department head is not dependent on 65-35 or anything else. It's the first part of the policy is, and this is really, I think, up to each of the governing committees, if you will. The schools can say to their folks when they come in for budget, look, what I want you to do is come in with a budget that improves guidance services. That's what I want. Everything else. And we could say, on the municipal side, we want you as a department, you're responsible as a department head to come in with a level service budget. Now, one of the problems with level service budget is it's all the people you have times, 0.025 or whatever the number is, which is not quite the same thing, because we're not challenging them to say, can you do it better? Where can you do it better? Where can you do it more efficiently? And this is not for the Finance Committee. Ultimately, it would be, but it's for the board and the school committee to say to folks, level service means you can deliver the same value to people, and how much would that cost? I mean, an example, of course, is technology. Can I do a better job of permitting, for example, if I use more technology?
But it's not the Finance Committee's purview to say.
No, we need to come with that.
Right. Yeah, that's at a different level, to say you can do the same thing in a different way, and perhaps find some cost savings using technology or different staff allocation.
Well, what I guess I'm trying to work into the sense of the policy is that component is required. Now, it's not required at the FinCom level.
No.
But if we're going to agree to something, we want to agree, particularly from school and municipal side, that we agree that part of our operation is the more efficient delivery question.
And honestly, on that side, if you were to find a more efficient way to permit and cut the cost needs to provide the same services as the building department.
Right.
And you put that money that you save towards council on aging, I don't necessarily know that's outside of our purview to comment on too much, whether.
Well, that may be, see, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I mean, maybe you're right, because ultimately, we're all responsible for delivering services to the citizens of the town.
But
And I'm not directly responsible for the schools, but I'm not being a very good member of this board if I'm not worried about quality education, as well as safety and highway safety, and et cetera, et cetera.
So, but our business is not necessarily, it's not so easy to predict. Families move in, a special education student moves in.
Right.
There's mandates for ELL.
Yeah.
There's a student with a vision problem, and I'm not giving specific examples, I'm just
Right,
saying in general. So what looks like we were planning in October, we could be looking at $150,000 to $200,000 difference. And then someone may move out, so there is some movement
Right.
both ways. Unfortunately, it's less moving out, it's more funding and more resources are necessary to meet the state mandate.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm not saying anything, I mean, I've seen some models, and
Less predictable.
I've looked at some model, I mean, this is a revenue model.
Yep.
Here's the revenue, let's pass it out. Other towns are using a cost model. We say, okay, let's put the costs where they're supposed to be, and when we do that, we can allocate like 3% to operating budget, but we're going to take out of that special ed, because we don't know. So it's going to be 8% sped as you're planning. There are other ways to get at this. They may not be as simple, and therefore, if they're not simple, then they're more complex, and people will lose confidence in them quickly because they don't understand it. But there are other ways to get at this. We've seen some other towns, I've seen some other towns as they model it. So there are ways to provide some relief in the way you calculate things, I guess. And there's also, where do you put them? Where do you put these things? Should health care be split into an operating budget item between the departments that are incurring the cost? Should we have a model where we'd redo the budget to really reflect where the costs are coming from, whether it's for buildings, health care, pension, insurance, because in other models, in other sectors, a group accountable for a function has to take into account all of its costs. And does that give us a better way of trying to analyze cost, because it puts a greater responsibility on the department, if you will, to do whatever it can to manage those costs.
It's certainly more transparent as well.
Well, it certainly is more transparent. Now, does that change anything of the 4%? I don't know, but what I'm trying to suggest is, from my point of view, to give validity going forward, we have to do some reexamination and recasting of where we are, or confirm that the model we have now is the best that could possibly be. And I'm very concerned about trying to do that for fiscal '21.
Yeah.
I don't think there's
Moving
enough
healthcare
time.
and pension, I think makes sense. I just don't think it's going to change the allocation too much right now, one way or the other, but I think it makes a ton of sense.
Well, it does, I believe it will build some confidence. I mean, I look at it from the tax, where is my tax dollar going? Well, it's going to healthcare. Well, okay, well, where does that come from? I don't mean to just hang on healthcare, but I mean, that's one of the items.
It's a big item.
It is a big item. And it's one we're looking at as uncontrolled.
Right.
Well, that's just not true. It's uncontrolled if you never change the benefit, if you never change the formula for cost sharing, if you never change the design, then the cost will go up based upon what happens.
I think it's very opaque.
It's very opaque. It's not going to get a lot clearer, but
No.
I think there's value to the citizens of trying to do some recasting of this. And in other towns I've seen, even OPEB. OPEB becomes a budgeted item. It's not a separate item. It's not a warrant item. The budget might be zero, but it's there. It's attributable to people who are running departments. A little bit off topic, but I think it's something that we should consider. Sorry. Others?
Could I, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Doug, you had something.
You sort of stole a couple of the points that I was going to make.
Telepathy.
So,
So never
I was
mind.
thinking I was thinking along the lines of some combination of what you just mentioned in terms of breaking some of these items out, and like healthcare, for example, and really allocating them more specifically than they're allocated. It's a little difficult for me to follow sort of what Craig's saying, because I don't have his numbers. I don't have the spreadsheet that he's looking at
We're not
and that
going
he's
to hand it out tonight either.
that
We're
he's
gonna
throwing out.
recast it a little
I
bit
just
with
know that,
Carol's
just looking
numbers.
at the forecast for the revenues, that, excluding CPC funds and excluding any marijuana, we're barely getting 4% growth in any year, and I don't see we get there until 2023, or 2022, actually, on a total basis. 2023 is the first time we cross 4%, as far as from this revenue forecast sheet. So I guess that's that's sort of where your starting point was, that you figured 4% is a sustainable number. I like the idea conceptually, because I think it provides a little more discipline than sort of this 65-35, which seems sort of arbitrary, and it's great that it's worked for a long time, but it's a little arbitrary, and I think putting some specific numbers down for budget growth it offers more discipline and ties it more closely to realistically to what we have to work with from the economy and what's likely to be available. And as Craig pointed out, there's not that many ways you can slice this.
Right.
There's only so many dollars, and it's all just changing the size of each piece of pie. The pie's the same size no matter what you do. So I think having something like this is conceptually appealing relative to just the 65-35. And I think it would be helpful from a discipline standpoint on all departments to have that number, that actual percentage growth number in their head as they budget year to year. And so I would, and I also agree that I don't know how you do this for 2021. I was thinking, particularly in the case of the school, some sort of phase in, or it just seems too fast to try to push that for 2021, make such a big change after such a long period of time of doing it a certain way.
Well, that assumes that the answer is that the school gets less and the municipal gets more. So I think the discipline applies to both sides, to
Yeah.
say, you know what, My only concern with this is that we have, as a group, we basically punted this down the road now for several meetings. I want to thank Craig and the folks for putting something concrete in front of us so we can at least debate it. But I'd like, if we decide to, and this really has to be decided by each group, although if we can get up from the table feeling reasonably good about it, that, maybe there is a short-term solution for 2021, but that's contingent upon everyone's agreement that we will really work hard to come up with changes or, fully embrace the proposal that we have. And I don't want, it's hard to do, and it's going to require some work, and I do want to get us to a point where we're all working from the same set of numbers. But I think it's going to be really hard to, unless everybody wants to call the meeting to order, vote on it tonight, and say, okay, we're fine, which I think is a little premature.
I have a proposal for FY21 because we need it. So expediency being, the reason we're here tonight. I want to go through with Carol and go through my numbers before I hand anything out. But I have a few things included in there, like estimates for marijuana going out future years, but it's only $100,000. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that's twice as high as it should be, half what it should be. I got no idea. So I got a little bit of money in there. I'm going to compare all of her numbers to my numbers. I am going to schedule time. We'll sit in an office with a computer and we'll figure it out and get all the numbers to match. And then we can talk about it because this is what I do for a living, as well as you. So it's not a hobby. So we can go through and do this forecasting. But I think this year, I think that my recommendation would be stick with 65-35, but not to exceed 4%. If my numbers are right and we actually do grow at almost 5%, I don't want to put that into budgets for operations this year. I would do a 65-35 split this year, not to exceed 4% growth. And if my numbers are wrong and it's 3.8% growth, I'm sorry?
I only see 2%.
I want to look at your numbers. I think that there's things in there that need to be looked at. Okay, I'll look through the whole thing, but I've
She's
seen.
the finance director.
Hold on.
Not of the town.
Yeah.
Not of the town.
Yeah. But no, I want to go
I
through.
certainly hope it's 4%,
Yeah.
but, let's sit
I will
down
look,
and-
I will look at it, because last year we went through the same thing where we were talking about $500,000, it was really $900,000, so.
Well,
let me,
Yeah, it has happened before, but some of it is inevitable because of our constraint on our side
Yeah.
to do revenue projection.
Right.
Which you might argue is unnatural, but it's just what we got to deal with.
But last year it was, and it was the first year you'd used the system we work on and everything else, but it was off by $500,000 or $400,000, not because of, the numbers that I saw coming out when Mark and I got it was $500,000, it was really $900,000. So I want to look at this and I want to see what it is, and I want to make sure we're on the same page. I'd like to schedule time to talk with you about it and go
We're
through it.
happy to accommodate, to the extent possible, the Finance Committee, because we all want to be working from the same set of numbers to the extent that we can. Kathy, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just have two quick questions. I don't know them, but is a question for the school. Is SPED refundable by the state or the federal government?
We get some funding from the state in circuit breaker, but it's never enough to cover our
What, do you know what
expenses.
percentage it is offhand, how much you've been?
I don't know offhand.
And where does the
never
money
know.
go? Back into the general fund or to the school?
It comes into the school. It's never enough to cover our costs. It's a reimbursement, but it's not enough. It's not a one-to-one.
And it's built into the budget every year, so circuit breaker funding is part of our budget. So if special education tuitions are, let's say, $1.3 million, it's, circuit breaker is part of the formula and the budget that we put together. So it's been in place for several years. We're hoping for a little uptick, but we get circuit breaker next year based on this year's costs, so it's delayed a year. And it's a complex formula of 3 times the foundation amount, so, and then a percentage of that. So
Could you define circuit breaker?
above that, we can,
What is circuit breaker?
so it's a partial state reimbursement for extraordinary special education funding.
If they have enough money, it's 75% for any cost above 3 times the average tuition for the student. So again, it's dependent on a couple of different factors. The other thing is, as Nancy pointed out, it's always in arrears. So if, for example, you happen to have a low year this year in tuitions, but as Steve pointed out, you have a child move in, and next year you all of a sudden have higher tuitions, you're not going to get your circuit breaker for that child. That next year, you're not going to get it until the following year.
Good, thank
So you're
you.
going to have to absorb that expense without any reimbursement from the state.
So we're happy to do a more complete explanation when we do our presentation to FinCom.
Yeah, I guess that also there's, there's we're looking at the big picture of the tax levy. And circuit breaker is an example of, and we have it on our side, building permits, of money that's getting generated, and it's in the, other fees or something?
Local receipts.
Local receipts. So the source of that, I mean, in the short run, we're not having simply a windfall, if you will, from Glen Ellen's buildings as the taxes go up. We're getting a much higher than anticipated, not really, I mean, we anticipate, much higher than normal fees are being collected by wiring inspectors, building inspectors, et cetera.
But temporary.
Yeah, it's going to go away. It's just like the fact that these are going to go away.
My other question for
Yep.
Mr. Kaczynski, Mr. Schultz said that no other town has looked at perhaps money that comes from a senior son over 55 going elsewhere other than the percentage of the, could that possibly be done?
It could, but I think it could, but it would be cumbersome. It would be a lot more labor intensive to be able to break those numbers out, and it would probably be subject to a lot of volatility from year to year, which again is something that we'd have to look at if that was the approach or the model considered. I think, again, from my viewpoint as the administrator, I think you do want as much predictability as you can get and as much stability as you can get. So I think that needs to be taken into account if you're considering kind of just picking certain types of new growth to pocket into certain areas. So I would tend to lean towards something that was more steady and predictable as much as possible. I mean, there's a lot of unpredictability in doing this, but.
I just wonder what happens when all of a sudden and if I might, Mr. McCaffrey, if we see an uptick in municipal services as a result of this, and there's been absolutely no impact on schools at all from this revenue, from the development.
Well, that's part of I think, the broader needs conversation, which I think Selectman Germain brought up earlier, that, there's a lot of ways to look at this, and I think that's the difficult discussion you're all having tonight. I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I think you have to look at a way to move forward on the revenue sharing that tries to meet the needs of all the citizens as fairly as possible. It's not an easy path or an easy solution to that, but I think whatever final agreement or understanding comes to pass, it needs to be something that provides some sort of stability and some level of predictability from year to year. I think that's important.
In order to move this along a little bit, I'd like to just ask that people give it some further thought. Obviously, Craig has offered to revisit the numbers and whatnot, so there's a proposal on the table. My question to the group is, do we want to take the opportunity, if you will, to, from my perspective, any proposal as a member of the select board, it's the board has to look at it and make its comments, make its determination as a separate board, just like the school committee would, and the finance committee as well. But, is there an opportunity for this group to come back together again within a relatively short period of time? I'm talking about, maybe end of February, and say, okay, and I don't know if that's even too late. What are we going to do for FY21 in order to, make a fair and reasonable decision and not sort of leave it up to a free-for-all?
If the 3 entities go away, discuss it, come up with, their voted position on it, and then we come back, then what? carry your thought forward. If we come back, how was the decision made?
Well, the decision is made by a board coming to the other two and saying, this, we agree to this configuration. This is what we believe. We adopt this policy for the development of the FY21 budget. And the school committee adopts it, and Finance Committee says, I'll go along with it.
I think going off to our separate boards is not the way to go. I think what we need to do is get Craig and the finance director to sit down and put some numbers to this, so what this would look like in FY21.
Yep.
I'm not ready.
Okay.
We're not even a quorum, we're not ready. and
I don't think the Board of Selectmen is ready either.
It would be
To
appropriate
Pete's-
for us to react to something.
Yes.
Let's put true number, or what we believe are true numbers to it, and then we can actually see, and then we can go into our level service budget.
Right.
So we can talk about impacts, right?
Yeah, okay.
And the town can do the same.
But
same
still, okay, do that. How is the policy, what are the mechanics of adopting either status quo, keeping the policy as is, or changing the policy?
I think from a practical point of view, we could do, as Steve indicates, if we brought quorums of each group to a meeting together, we could in fact adopt it. This is
So-
not a vote
so is
by,
Two-thirds, we're looking for two-thirds to adopt it, or unanimous, or?
no, if it's not adopted by everybody, then it's not a policy that we accept, and we go back to dogfight.
And what it comes down to is if the selectmen decide that they want to do 4.5 and the school wants to do 4, and the finance committee decides 3 3/4 is the right number, we'll recommend it 3 3/4. They'll submit it 4.5 and they'll submit it 4, or, whatever numbers we come out at. But it's best if we're all walking into it at the same place.
I just want us all to have a clear picture
Yeah.
of what are we going away to do, and what the expectation is if and when we come back.
I think we react to what the numbers really are. I don't think we can have the conversation and vote or propose until we see the impacts on both sides.
Yeah, we need the real numbers, and we need to take a look at them, and if one or more of the groups wants to provide an alternative thought for this discussion, I agree with Steve, it's better to have this dialogue here and to find out what our concerns are, what our hesitations are, what we're willing to compromise to do, because then we're going to all get up from the table, and we're going to adopt it, and then we're going to move forward to the next part of the budget process. Fact of the matter is that this committee, this group of people, is a voluntary agreement by 3 independent boards to get together, has no authority to do anything other than debate. And one of the groups could get up and say, I don't like this, goodbye.
I would assume that the most efficient way to do this is for the Finance Committee to look at it and have, within the Finance Committee, this is what we think is going to make sense for 2021, as we're looking at, the budget. Certainly, the Select Board is going to be making their recommendation as they put together the final budget, but considering the 65-35 came out of the Finance Committee to begin with, I think it makes sense that we would be kind of proposing to the other committees, this is what we think would make the most sense for 2021. And each separate committee would be making their own determination from there. Because I'm not sure that another tri-board meeting is going to be feasible considering the timeframe that we have.
I have a question, and maybe I fell asleep. Or maybe it was just beyond my understanding. But if we've got money coming from the Glen, and we've got money coming from a senior development, and the Glen isn't impacting the schools, and the senior development isn't impacting the schools, why does that money go to the, no offense, why does that money go to the schools? Why is that not going to the COA and the police and the fire department? I'm,
I would say the answer is because we're a town. I mean, and that's what it comes down to. Towns have responsibility to do everything. And that's why we moved away from the 65-35, because I didn't want to take the majority of that money coming from those things and put it in the school. I was trying to, and I see where we differ. It's the starting assumptions. It's FY20 recap is different. I started at a lower point. But anyway, get into that.
Okay.
But it's the fact that that if we do have extra money coming in from the Glen, I was looking to put it things that benefit the entire town. I'll argue that Glen will never, 80% of them will never go to the COA. They're building a beautiful place up there that we should have as our COA.
We
So-
don't know,
But, well, that's the proposals, but,
we don't know about
yeah.
them coming.
But I would say that as we find out what they're actually doing and what they're using, if they are using the Council on Aging, if they are using things, that's when we get to year 4, 5, 6 of the plan, and we can start talking about where do we have to redevelop and where do we have to reallocate. But it's a town. A town's responsibility is many things. One of those is education. So, I mean, I'll be done with kids in the school next year, and I do not intend to ever fight
I
against the
understand, but
school.
there is money that comes from, as she says, there are other developments, though, that monies could go to the school. I'm just trying to figure out maybe another way of delegating the money. I'm sorry. I just feel like our seniors, there are a lot of people who get the short end of the stick. And I just wondered if there's, because the money's coming from a 55 and older community and a senior community, if maybe it could go to that community, as well as some of the, go to the schools if need be, but some of it, the police, there are departments that would benefit and overall help the whole town. I'm just asking. I mean,
I think once you see Craig's numbers.
Then
on
I'll
the sheet,
understand better.
It's easier to understand once you see how he's allocated it.
okay.
And where there are spikes, it definitely makes sense to try to even those out across the board. So no one's faced with major layoffs 2 years after you hired people. It just, having the budgets be as fixed and determinable and periodic as possible across the board, across the schools and across the town departments, just, it gives everyone the same expectation. Everyone can kind of be on the same page, and then you make your determinations as to what are the highest priorities for each department. It kind of puts things with boundaries around them that you're not arguing about the boundaries so much.
Okay, and I want you to know, I support our school systems, and I always have. It wasn't that I want to take monies away from you. I just wondered how.
Well, there are legitimate points of view in a town, which is a multi-generational town. I mean, that's nothing bad. I mean, it's a good thing. But talking about it is the right thing. But back to Pete's point, I mean, it's up to this group as you want to, whether or not you would like to, as a group, try to schedule a meeting in a couple of weeks to revisit this, or do you want to operate independently, circulate proposals and whatnot, and then, determine that that's the policy that we would like to follow, at least for FY21. My personal view is it's incumbent upon us as the leaders to come up with a methodology, policy, what have you, even if it's confirming the existing one for FY21, because otherwise we run the risk of, one group says yes, the other group says no, and then, we duke it out in the wrong arena, that's all.
My interest is that we know what we're going to do, so it increases the likelihood that it happens on a timely basis for us to enact the change. I really don't care one way or another, and I defer to the chair of the Finance Committee. I think her proposal is great. Let the Finance Committee take the lead on it, circulate the proposal, and then through communications, either letters or slides, send it to the other two committee board, and you either adopt it or don't.
How do others feel about this?
I think so you're going, I'm just asking, so
Yeah.
you're going to come up with something, approve it, and then send it to us and say, this is what we've done? What about the step of putting the numbers
Yes,
into?
that's first and foremost.
But then, are you going to get that to us so we can have discussions?
I think the finance director should provide those.
Well, however it gets to
Right.
us.
Right.
And then, would you invite us to your meeting for
Yes.
input?
Yes. I think that because we have such a compressed timetable in which to make our recommendations on these various things, and it takes a while before we actually have a budget that we can be discussing, like a full budget, I think it would make sense for us to work on this proposal and invite, input from the various boards versus us using one of our meetings to try to do a tri-board and not be able to do the other business that we may have.
I think that we should probably schedule a meeting to discuss this towards the top of our calendar and publish that, and if somebody from the school wants to attend and the select person wants to attend, I'm sure it'd be open for input.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I was thinking. We're not just gonna,
Make a
review this in
decision.
isolation and say, here, take it or leave it. Yeah.
Okay.
The whole point is for it to be collaborative and us to be on the same page. But it is tough, as we start getting further into the budget season, it's tough for us to take a whole meeting
I'm not suggesting.
outside of our schedule.
I support this. I've been here for all of the meetings. I think this is a great thing. I think the town's in a better place. It's helped. But there has also been a process that's been going on, and 3 people came back with something, and now we're literally starting from scratch, and we're February. Maybe not scratch, but we're basically saying, what you've done is great, but now we're going to do it again. And so, are we too late in this process? I mean, we're rushing. It is February 6th.
I don't think
I
it's
would
doing
do
it
it.
again. I think it's clarifying some numbers, getting on the same page, and then publishing a chart. And I think once we get to that, I think when's our next meeting?
We have to set it.
Soon after we set our first meeting, we will have a timeline and a number.
I don't see this as starting from scratch. In fact, I think what Craig has put together gives us a straw man from which we are now going to move forward. How we choose to move forward, he's going to provide with the finance director some inputs. It's going to be up to these 2 elected bodies on top of that to review that, put their inputs together. My point earlier was to give a context that was somewhat different, but I have no problem using the baseline. The concern I have is, let's not get fixated on any one way of approaching things. And if he comes up with something that makes some sense, and we make comments, and your group make comments, and we can achieve something out of it that gives us a new policy that we can move forward on, that's excellent. But we have to work it, and it's going to be difficult to work.
Would we be able to have our finance committee, our meeting perhaps one evening, and schedule our meeting for an hour and 15, however long you think it would be for us to discuss this, and then have a tri-bar meeting immediately after, so that we can open it up for further discussion? And I'm just questioning. I don't know if you know better than I as far as time.
Considering the scheduling difficulty to put this together, I think that might be a little optimistic. But we could certainly try. But, yeah, I mean, we're certainly, we would definitely invite, members from the other boards to come. Whether it's a full tri-board meeting might be a little optimistic at this point.
All right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is an open meeting. Right, yeah, and not just the boards. When, finance committee meetings are always open to the public, as are school committee and as our board of selectmen. Select board, sorry.
I'd just like to say, on behalf of when I was a planning board member, that when these over 55 developments came in, a lot of waivers were given to allow more houses to be built on the property, to allow greater retention basins, and several other waivers that were given knowing that the schools would not be impacted. And it was the planning board's understanding that this money would go to the municipal side. And I would recommend now to the planning board that regular subdivisions be built now, because why give greater density or perks to a developer to build an over 55 when the same amount of money is going into the municipal side as would be going into a conventional subdivision? Thank you.
I'll say that when those were presented, though, that was presented that it wouldn't be impacting the school, and a lot of us who supported school items and other things. We're happy with that, and we gave permission to be built that way, knowing that, I don't know, I think that it's a town. It's a town, and you don't subdivide people by where they live or how they have kids. I don't have kids in the school in however many more months, and I'm going to fully support my tax dollars going to the school, and the police, and the fire. I'm not going to say that now they don't have kids there, I want an ambulance service and not school services. And that's just the way a town works. So that's my rebuttal to that one, but.
Well, I've supported the school system since we've been here for 38 years, and I still support, but I think that there can be room for, well, discuss.
To Pete's point of view, we need a way forward, and if the Finance Committee has taken it upon itself to develop it and then present it, the Finance Committee has to be prepared to have one or two of the other boards say, we don't like it. Thank you very much. We're not going to go along with it.
Okay.
So whatever we do in terms of a group, based upon what the journey we've taken so far, and maybe it is Finance Committee invites boards and school committee to attend its meeting where it's proposed, and if it's not willing to take feedback, then we have no agreement. And we don't have a better situation, we have a worse situation. I have certainly sympathy for scheduling difficulties, but I think it's important for us to come up with something. And frankly, you know, most of us saw this piece of paper tonight. This is a very important and fundamental change in the way we've been doing business, and I think as members of our respective boards, and maybe that's the way to do it, we need the time to take a look at it. You know, from my point of view, I think that it's important for another round of feedback before we close out FY '21. So if, again, we don't decide anything, the Finance Committee is free to go off and do it. I mean, that's the last item on our agenda is what is this committee all about and what's its charge? And we're feeling our way to it. But I would like to encourage an opportunity, you know, to meet again, and maybe it is at the FinCom's meeting, to re-examine this, and we come to the table as each board, having looked at it and taken our position, so that we know, you know, what we're willing to go along with. And I'm not sure it's going to be that difficult, but scheduling is always a challenge.
If we could figure it out, I'd certainly be open to us meeting together as a tri-board in early February.
Well, this
You
is
know,
early February,
well,
so mid.
Yes. But, you know, I don't think next week is going to work. So then you're talking the third week of February. And that's school vacation.
Well, I understand that, but
Why?
we can,
We can figure it out.
All
I
right.
mean, the scheduling's easy. The FinCom's having a meeting. We can post and go with the
And go.
quorum.
right,
You can post and go with the quorum. If we can't make it, we can't make it.
right.
We now know the date. We don't have to go to 3 different committees. and
Well, I
try to
think
figure
that's
the date.
really the
How about
idea.
Wednesday, February 19th?
No, I can't make that one. And since it's going to be this plan, it's kind of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote the plan and now you're running out of time.
I'll do the other two.
Can you provide it to us?
I need to be there to explain it, because there's a lot of walking through it.
So what about the
26
26th?
would be fine.
What about school committee?
I'm speaking for only 2 of us, but I'm going to put it on the calendar and we're going to have a conversation and there will be representation there.
Okay.
Whether we can get a quorum or not, but there'll be people there. What time's your meeting?
7:30.
Is it fair to say that this could be early on in the,
Yes,
would this be the first?
I would say so. Yes.
Can I just, I like the direction you're going earlier, where we discuss it and come with a plan, and then have people give feedback on it. Because I think that if we sit around a table like this and try to plan it out, and that's the great, it's going to just be more of this. So I think that it is a chance for, I think, a presentation of a plan that we have that is finished and that we as a finance committee agree on would probably be the most productive way to do it. And then that's subject to amendments and changes as we hear back from other people who've had a chance to look at it. That would be my recommendation, because it's going to be almost impossible to write a plan with all the different groups in the room.
The sausage making may be ugly, but it's probably necessary, because there's a lot of different opinions on this.
Well, I think that each of the constituent boards, is willing to come to the table and compromise so we get an outcome. And, for a board, whether it's a school committee or the Board of Selectmen, to come back with a position, we have to have the material.
Right, that's what I was saying.
And we have to take a position based upon our review of what was proposed, which hopefully reflects not only what was originally proposed, but some of the comments that were discussed at this meeting.
But then you're getting into March, and the
I'm not
School
sure why
committee.
it's March.
Well, we can't do February, I can't do February.
Well,
Yeah.
but if we can't develop a policy, a new policy, by February 26th, then we have two options. One, we get up on the table and say there's no policy, every man for himself, every person for himself.
Look, I don't think
Or-
that's what's being said. What's being said is we won't even have seen it until February 26th.
I'm missing something. Then we're asking the wrong group to prepare it then.
Can we post on February 12th and have a meeting of the FinCom, and then have the 26th, the meeting that we're discussing? That'll give us a chance to hash it out a little bit and get some ideas.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, Deidre says yes.
Mhm.
Posted in time.
Yeah, we've,
So have a meeting on the 12th, did you say?
we've discussed that, yeah.
Next year.
That works.
And then the 26th, have everybody get together there to discuss the whole project.
It is this year.
And then we'll have something that's finished. And we can distribute it at the close of that meeting, so you guys have a chance to review it at your meetings.
Well, when would the materials be ready?
And is it
That night.
The 26th?
No,
No, the 12th.
The 12th.
The
for us to
12th.
review. So we can spend the night of the 12th reviewing that material.
Right.
At 7:30.
But that could get sent out to the other boards as well, and so
At the
they
end
would
of the
have 2 weeks to look at it and come back with their notes and questions, and
I would send it out after the completion of that meeting, when there's the finalized product that the FinCom fully supports, and then send that out as an endorsed document from the FinCom. Because that's the one thing we do get to talk about, is how the money is allocated and divided. We don't get to pick where it's spent exactly, but this is the kind of thing that we've done historically. Then we can hear their feedback and finalize the plan as we get closer to, on the 26th, we can finalize it based on feedback we get from the other groups.
That seems reasonable.
so they'd have 2 weeks to look at what we came up with.
Pretty much.
And then come back on the 26th.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that I can, yes, we will work together to try and get this done, but I think that it's up to the other two, the school committee and the board, if they want to take a position that any of this needs to be fixed or changed or whatever, we should get it to you.
Yeah. any
Again,
notes you
based
have would-
upon the board's taking a position. I mean, I'm not in a position to tell you what the Board of Selectmen, or Select Board, his position is. I'm just one member. So we have certainly meeting on the 8th and the 10th, where we could have,
10th and 24th. So you'd be able to meet on the 24th to discuss.
You'll have it before.
no, I mean, okay, well, doesn't mean we can't schedule another meeting to go over this, because it's important.
I know we're going through a process here. I can tell you right now, a change in the split this year, as is going to impact us significantly.
Well, then, is the position of the school committee, without taking a position,
You can't
is
take a
that you're going to
position.
advocate
Yeah.
that we leave it as is for the current fiscal year?
I can't speak for all of us, but for the two people in the room, I think that's a fair,
Okay, well, that's,
I think we're too
with the
late.
cap.
I honestly,
that's a
personally.
significant statement, okay, because then
Yeah, well,
the,
yes.
I'm
yes.
not saying it's the wrong statement,
No,
I'm
no,
just
no,
saying it's a
no.
significant statement.
I'm being careful that we're not a quorum, and there's only two school committee members here. There's five of us. We need another one in the room.
Yep.
And he was supposed to be here, and he's not here. But yes,
Okay.
I think personally, this is, we are up against the clock, the calendar, and we're fighting a losing battle, and we're trying to now squeeze something in something that's taken months to come to, and now we're going to try to, however you want to say it, we are changing it. And we're changing it potentially dramatically, and we're going to try to do this in 2 weeks. As much as I appreciate the effort and the desire, I can't see that happening, because we're going to get something, you guys are going to meet on the 12th, you're going to send something to us, and then we're going to have the opportunity to come and have a conversation on the 26th, and say the 26th blows up. Now we are much worse than where we ever been. We're going back potentially 22 years ago.
I don't
For why?
disagree with you, Steve. I mean, from my point of view, the practical issue for the Board of Selectmen is to either say, look, we'll go with 65-35 and keep working, or we'll adopt the proposal that was presented tonight once the numbers are,
Solidified,
yeah. I mean, that to me is a practical choice that we face as a board.
Put the numbers into this that was proposed.
Well, and the one caveat I'd say that kind of splits the difference between the two is 65-35 if the numbers are less than 4%. If the numbers are more than 4%, then 4%. Because my fear is if we get more than 4% growth, I don't want to start growing the budgets by more than 4% for sustainability's sake. But if it's less than a 4% growth, and I see where the differences are now, but if the 4% growth, then I would stick with the 65-35 just to keep it equitable for one more year.
And then we can still work on what you're
Right,
talking.
we can still do it and do it
And
right.
here we are here, if it doesn't happen now, we're a year ahead discussing it.
If my worksheet is, if there's validity in the numbers I started with, then we cap it at 4. If my numbers are entirely wrong, we cap it at 65-35, and it'll be less than 4.
Sounds good to me.
That's fair, you know.
Well, Jody called our bluff, okay.
I'm just trying to get us to a practical
No,
point
I'm
that's
fine with
workable
that.
for all three groups.
I was trying to schedule Carol in between a physical and
Okay.
something else on the 12th.
And I'm thinking on the 12th, I mean, here it is, the 6th, then we have tomorrow, and we have the budget hearing all day Saturday, that, and then there's Monday, and Tuesday I'm out. So where is the time to,
I was going to
Work
shoot you
on
an
anything.
email with questions, brief questions, because I see that we
All
differ
right.
on 4 key numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of.
If I could just bring everybody back together again, without being able to commit the board, I think informally between school and municipal, we've agreed to take a look at this thing. We have the 2 options that we will debate and consider. We can actually talk about this, Pete, I mean, because we have a meeting going on. And if my colleague is willing to go that route, I'm certainly willing to do that.
Yeah, I think it makes some sense. I
Yeah.
have no problem moving down that line. And we'll see what happens. I mean, I would hope to have inputs, as my colleague would, and we'll see what happens. There's nothing at this point locked in concrete. If we work something out and it works out with the school board, great. If it doesn't, we move forward in whatever way we decide we have to move forward.
Well, the way I'm looking at it is we're actually, you saying about being against the gun and everything, if it doesn't, we're ahead of the game, if it takes us a year with this information. I mean, so we're actually, I'd like to look at it as the cup half full as opposed to the cup half empty at this point.
I think that's right. I mean, the only danger we run is the danger we had last year. We said, yeah, we got to work on this.
No,
And
we
here
don't
we
let it
are.
happen.
Yeah.
If this is the start of the, if we get through FY '21 and we start the FY '22 process or conversation about
Right.
this, now,
Okay, all right.
Okay, good.
If I may, given the fact that this has now been going on for quite a while, I would like to just note on the agenda a comment on marijuana. We'd like to update people on when the money's going to come rolling in. We'd love to update you on when the money's going to come rolling in. This won't take very long, folks.
I can tell you what's going to go wrong.
I want to just give you a context. There's two businesses,
Did you say?
as you know, 2 licensed marijuana businesses in town. One of them is up and running.
Oh, boy.
One of them is scheduled to provide us with a first quarter payment based on first quarter activity. We can comfortably report to you that they aren't ready to tell us what the first quarter activity was, although maybe we'll hear next week.
Parking lot's full.
Well, I didn't say there wasn't people going in there, I just don't know how many and how much they're spending. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the scheduled payment, but we don't have anything in the door yet, either for the HCA or the sales tax. Carol, do you have does that show them the schedule of payments on the
Yes.
sales tax side?
Yes.
Okay, and then on 617, 617 is not a licensed business yet. I spoke to them today. They've gotten their special permit, they've gotten the permits that they're required from the town, they've submitted their application to the Cannabis Control Commission, so they're in the Cannabis Control Commission sausage grinder, if you will. They expect to hear back over the next 6 weeks or so. That's their expectation. They can't control it. I forget the numbers. There are 700 applicants and 200 have been approved, so it's a whole rigmarole of getting through the whole thing. That process then requires them to respond to what they call a request for information from the CCC. That goes to another period of time, then they have to get back to them. The fellow said to me tonight, look, I'm not making a commitment, but we hope to be beginning Phase 1 construction by August.
Oh.
Phase 1 construction is going in there and retrofitting that building for the first, I forget what it is, 50,000 square feet of grow space. So go from there to where they get their first sale to be determined. We're not going to expect revenue, I don't think, realistic, other than the first payment they already made, from 617, at least until probably the calendar year 2021. And then hopefully ComCan will be fully up and running and generating the money that we had hoped for. The only other thing I wanted to throw out to the group was, if you've noticed, there is some legislative action going on right now. The industry and some other folks are at it for the third time. There are some potentially troublesome provisions in that statute which would give the Cannabis Control Commission the responsibility to approve all HCA's, even ones that are already issued, which is really not a good idea, because we all entered into these agreements in good faith based upon the rules as they existed. So if you'd like to call your representative and tell them to vote no, go right ahead. So I just wanted to, I know there's been some talk in the, wherever it is, about issues for the financial backing from 617. They did have one of their partners untimely pass away, but they're on schedule with their fundraising. They have an operating retail operation in Boston now, so it's an up and going business. So it's unfortunate for those folks, because one of them was a close friend of one of the founding partners, and we certainly have sympathy, but it does not appear to have any effect on the business going forward. The delay is at the Cannabis Control Commission. So, with that said, what have we got?
So on the papers that I just handed out, the top one is for the registered marijuana dispensary, which is ComCan. That's the medical marijuana. The agreement was that on the effective date, the sales commencement date, that we'd receive $25,000, which we did. That opening day was November 4th, 2019, and we won't expect another payment from the medical marijuana distribution until the 19th month, which would be $50,000, the greater of $50,000 or 3%. So we've used $50,000 in the year two. You'll see that the expected date is June 30th of 2021 to receive that $50,000, and that's for the months 13 through 18. And then year three, the 25th month, which is December 31st, 2021, we're expected to receive an additional $50,000. The fourth year will be, the 37th month will receive $100,000, and that will be December 31st, 2022. And the year 5 on the 49th month will receive, that's December 31st, 2023, $100,000. And the final payment for this HCA will be in year 6 on the 61st month at December 31st, 2024 for $100,000.
Carol,
So-
none of these numbers are in your revenue forecast sheet, correct?
No, we can't use those numbers.
Right.
Um,
I'm just reaffirming what we've
Right.
discussed.
Right, the DOR says we
Yes.
cannot put them into our budget projection until we have a history of them actually producing money, in which case that we can then start to estimate, we think.
Right. And these HCA fees are the ones that are the marijuana impact fee,
Mhm.
so they have to be used directly for marijuana impact.
Right.
And then they go away at the 5th year.
Unless the contract is renewed.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, the year 2 and year 3, are those both FY '21 revenue, is when they'd be recognized? Should they be?
22.
Right, because you'll see for the 19th month, there, we can't recognize it until we actually receive it. So when these monies come in, they'll flow to free cash.
And they'll be FY '22 rather, not FY '21?
Right,
Yeah.
Right,
that's right.
because-
And then FY '23 for the next one, year 4 and 25?
Right.
4 and 25. Okay, thank you.
And these are it's greater of this or 3%. So to the extent there's 3% of sales is greater, then we'd get more.
Right.
This model
Of the
would
medical-
not be allowable on the recreational side.
Right.
Because it guarantees a payment that could be in excess of 3% of gross sales.
So
This is a medical dispensary, so unless the legislature messes with this,
Yeah.
this is a predictable amount.
So on the second sheet, that's the retail marijuana, which is the ComCan as well. The agreement is that the initial payment of the $15,000 was 90 days projected to actual operations or March 1st. And we received that payment on February 11th, 2019. We don't receive another payment on this schedule until this month, their opening date. If you go to the next page, you'll see month's tax assessed by the establishment on where it's highlighted in yellow. So their quarter happens to coincide with the quarter for collecting the taxes by the state. This is just a point of reference for you, so that the first quarter for ComCan recreational sales is November. So November, December, January is their quarter. We'll receive payment on sometime during the month of February for that first quarter. I did contact ComCan's accountant. They don't have the number available for us for the GPSR sales for marijuana at this point. They're hoping next week they'll have that number. So we'll know how much to expect by the end of February for the first payment of the marijuana sales.
Now, the HCA is 30 days from the close,
Right.
but the tax is different.
Right. So on the tax, and that's why I put the second sheet on here. So how it works for the state is that the retailer submits their November sales receipt, the taxes for those, the following month. So that's why you'll see the second month's tax establishment, and then you'll see the month tax revenue collected by DOR. So it's 1 month lag, but they only pay on the quarter. So even though they'll receive the January payment in February, DOR will pay us in March. So we only paid on the quarter. So it'll be on the March 31st distribution, and that will be the first time we'll see the sales, the local option tax on the marijuana coming in.
And we don't know what that is.
We don't have any
They
idea.
don't have a projection or
No,
anything.
they don't have a project.
Okay.
The state, so they, if I call them in March, they'll be able to tell me, but I was able to talk to the accountant at ComCan, and we've worked out that I think she'll submit her monthly, when she submits to the state, she'll submit that information. She'll send me an email, so I'll be able to know ahead of time what it's going to be.
And is that a 3% tax also? That's a 3%?
That's a 3%,
Yes.
right.
Also.
So the first 3% has to be used on marijuana impact. The second 3% from the local options tax can be used any way that you want to use it. But we aren't allowed to put anything in our budgets for this because we don't have experience on this, so we don't have any idea what the revenue stream's actually going to be. I would caution everybody as well, there are only 30 establishments in the state selling right now. There are 600 applications. So it will get diluted over time. So even though our numbers may be high coming in, we should be cautious that they will stay high, you know.
Just ask the
Literally.
casinos.
Yes. We hope, that's the hope,
You don't-
right?
Couldn't resist. At least know you're still awake over there, right? Okay.
So the last page is the 617 therapeutic. As Mr. McCaffrey said, they haven't started their construction yet. I believe when they first came before the board and gave us the initial check for $25,000, I think they had said it would be a 2-year process between the build-out and the grow. So we wouldn't expect to see any of these monies for probably 2 years. And in this case, on this grow facility, unlike the retail where it's, or the medical and retail where there's a set price, it's the greater of 3% or 20. On this one, it's 3% of total gross sales. So there is no guaranteed on HCA for 617 therapeutic.
So that's an update at least as to, where the money is coming, when it'll come. We should have better data, at least in the first quarter sales in another couple of weeks.
Right.
Now, once we get that, once we actually have that in the bank, it's going to be cash for this year, so
It'll flow to free cash.
it'll flow to free cash, because we haven't anticipated it, but we did receive it as a local receipt, so we might get a bump in free cash in the fall.
Cal, what, on the retail sheet with the nice rainbow
Right.
of payments
That's so
there.
you can distinguish year over year.
Right. I'm sorry, probably because it's late. How do those payment amounts line up with the distribution dates?
So
In other words, the first one that we're expecting, or the next one that we're expecting, comes a distribution payment on March 31st.
From the state, for the
From the state.
local option tax. We'll only get the local option tax every quarter.
So what quarters match up in the yellow, for example?
So it's going to be, for the state, it will be March 31st.
And that's the fourth month, year one?
Yes. That's when we'll receive the first quarter, and that's where it's on the front sheet, it says fourth month.
Okay, and then
That's when
just roll forward quarterly
Right.
from that point on?
Exactly.
Okay.
It just happens that it coincides, the state distribution with what we're going to get from Comcan as well. It's just the way that the quarter happened to line up for when their start date was.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on that? The only other thing I wanted to throw out, and I'm going to just throw it out, well, first of all, I asked folks what they would like to talk about from the chairs of our various committees, and ended up with a list that, as you can see how effective I was in getting this done by 10 o'clock. So these are topics for potential future discussion, and they're all relevant. They may, in fact, be interesting conversations among three boards, but my view is we're going to defer these until some other time, perhaps not in the middle of the budget debate, and then we'd be able to talk about some of these. Some of these are bigger policy kinds of things, and I think it's worth having some dialogue over. The last item was codification or clarification of what this is and how it works. We've been flying pretty much by mutual agreement. We get together about 3 times a year. The calendar probably hasn't worked as well as it should, because I think last year we actually met in January, which was a much better date for this, but calendars as such. My proposal is that for the next meeting, whenever it would be, I could or somebody will put together a draft, what I call a charter, this is what the committee's going to do, this is when we're going to meet, and then we won't be having these discussions about who's doing what with whom. The other advantage of that is it institutionalizes it. It's not just the goodwill of the people who are here, but it becomes part of the process that we use for primarily budgets and large budget items. I noticed in other towns, as I've looked through this kind of exercise is actually not common, but it's pretty widespread, and most of those towns will have a paragraph or two where they document what the group is, what it does, and when it's going to meet. So I would propose that we do that, and then frankly ask each of the independent boards, when we agree on what it is, after a prolonged and difficult negotiation, to just adopt it as the policy. And then what we would have is something that's in place for succeeding boards and whatnot, so they know that this process is something that we all agreed makes sense. So that's what I would propose. There being no objection, I now move that the Board of Selectmen meeting be adjourned.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None?
Finance Committee, I'll entertain a motion.
Move that we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for the Finance Committee to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you.